story is from Beat Me Saber. Picture this. This happened 12 years ago, and I am still reaping my rewards. I worked for the company. They did three-phase photography, family and children photography. No wedding or events or anything. Straight studio work that was in a portable setting. Sittings booked for 10 minutes and we were supposed to shoot 30 to 50 a day. Yes, it is as wretched of a job as it sounds. It was fast, high energy, and at times simply brutal. 1. Pre-seller. They come in 2 to 3 weeks in advance and sell a special 10 by 13 portrait and book the appointment. 2. The photographer, that's me in this instance, comes in for about a week and takes the pictures. 3. The salesperson returns 2 weeks later with the special along with the other 6 poses I took and tries to sell you $400 worth of pictures. I was very good at what I did. The company sales average was $100 per customer per 50 customers. The more you shoot, the lower your quality, because you spend less time taking care of details, and details sell pictures. My average was 175-ish per 150, 200 customers. I was making this company a lot of money, and they consistently treated me like crap. Oh, the stories. Their business model was shoot as many sittings as you can, as fast as you can. To them, shooting 50 with a $100 average was better than shooting 35 with a $150 average, even though the profit margin was exactly the same. I never agreed with that, and boss and I went round and round about it every week. They withheld raises because I didn't have enough sittings and took my bonuses because I wasn't meeting their quotas. So I figured out how to be fast, efficient, and damn good. That's another post. So that's the background. Now, the good stuff. Enter the jerk. The jerk is a pre-seller who lied to the customers, lied to the store, and would book appointments from 9 a.m. to 8:30 p.m., even though the studio hours were 10 a.m., 7 p.m. He told every lie in the book, and I think he even added a few of his own. Want to bring your dog? Family of 15? Sure, bring 5 changes of clothes, and I'll even have her do your makeup. I don't even do my own makeup. Come and get your picture taken, and we will throw in a free toaster. And just to make it interesting, he would triple and quadruple book appointments, and when he ran out of those, he would sell open appointments and tell people to just come in anytime, and my photographer will work you in. Grrr. Just writing that makes me mad even after all these years. The biggest problem was he would waive the sitting fee, or just not tell them. I was obligated to collect that $8. Every time I didn't, it came out of my check. It was a freaking nightmare. I refused to work behind the jerk for these and 1,000 other reasons. I told boss that if they ever put me behind the jerk again, I would quit. Which is exactly what happened. They knew he had been working at the store I was assigned, and they lied about it. I immediately called boss and told him this was my last week and that he needed to make arrangements to get the photography equipment at the end of the shoot. I should have walked out, but I was young and dumb. It was a 3-day shoot and I shot 316 customers by myself. That is an insane amount of sittings, and nobody was happy. Every night the store manager had to tell my customers to leave because the store was closed. People were lined up at 9 a.m. waiting for me. I took so much abuse that week. After a customer threw a shoe at me and another spit on my pizza, the store security guard brought a chair over and stayed with me almost the entire time I was there. I honestly cannot remember how many people were escorted out of the store because they acted a fool in my studio. It's been over a decade and I still have nightmares about that week, but nobody came to get the equipment, so I start making phone calls and plotting. Me. Hey, what do you want me to do with your equipment? Boss, you are going to need it next week in Florida. Me. No, because I quit. Boss. You didn't give me any notice, so I'm not accepting your resignation. I'm sending you to Florida next week. Me. I'm an independent contractor. Remember? You can't make me go to Florida. This is not complicated. I quit. That's another post. Boss. Just go to Florida. I don't have time for this now. You can quit in 3 weeks if you can hire a replacement. And he hangs up. Nope. Not going to Florida. I packed the equipment and took it home with me. The camera was a brand new Canon T2i 550D, and those were pricey. Back in 2010, I really didn't want to give it back, but it wasn't mine to keep. I had an idea. Boss was an absolute train wreck of a human. If he didn't want to do something, he wouldn't. If he could find someone else to do it, he would. I decided to use his own worst traits against him: avoidance and procrastination. The next thing I did was take the company credit card and go to the nearest storage unit with climate control. I rented a unit and paid for the first month, but just one. I unloaded it all, down to the last halogen light bulb. I took detailed pictures of everything and an inventory. I locked the door and walked away. At this point, there was nothing I could do but wait and hope Boss would continue to be the worthless wreck I knew him to be. Next, I called and reported the card stolen. Why? Because I knew if I didn't, that card would remain active and rent would be paid every month on time, and that just wasn't going to work for me. I cut it in half and sent it and the combination to the storage locker to Boss via FedEx, along with a hand-painted sign that said, "I quit." I also sent an email to HR telling them that I was terminating my contract and that Boss had the information on the equipment. This is probably the only sketchy thing I did. The person I emailed was out on medical leave, and I knew it. I could have sent that email to a dozen other people who worked there, but they might have paid attention to it. By the time she got back to the office, she had so many emails, she couldn't even begin to tackle them all. A month goes by, and the police knock on my door. Okay, so I wasn't expecting that. The company has reported the equipment stolen, and the police are there to investigate. I really thought I was going to jail. The cop that knocked on the door was fully expecting to take me away in handcuffs until I explained what was going on. I ended up taking copies of the emails to the police department, as well as my copy of the contract with the storage unit. I also had a copy of the shipping label. Both my name and the company were listed on the contract. I had to make an official statement and jump through some hoops. The company had placed a monetary value of $12,000 on the studio rig, so potentially I was in a lot of trouble. Except I covered my ass. The police told me I was in the clear because the storage unit had their name on the contract. Their credit card was used to pay for it, and I had sent the combination and all the pertinent information to the company. I am very good at CYAWP, cover your ass with paper. At this point, I figure the gig is up, because surely they are going to come to get this rig or send someone or something. Nope, Boss is still worthless. 2 more months go by. I get a call from the storage facility. They are about to cut the lock and auction the contents. I just about peed my pants. I was so excited. I called Boss again. He dodged my calls and ignored my emails to please call me immediately. I never specifically stated what I wanted to talk to him about, and just like I was hoping he would, he ignored me. Okie dokie. I have done all that I can. And that's when it all started to come together. And then I hit a pretty good snag, but it actually worked out better in the end. In this state, if a storage unit goes up for sale, the owner cannot purchase it at auction. I didn't know that. But where there is a will, there is a way. They sent letters and called 3 more times, and then the date was set. The unit went up for auction on my birthday. My neighbor went to the sale. He bought the unit for $125. I almost died. And of course, we were in cahoots on this, but we had to make it look like we weren't. The pistol grip the camera mounts cost more than that, not to mention the lighting, props, and costumes. And of course, the camera. My neighbor then put an ad in the local paper for photography stuff, $1,000 firm, but didn't list anything specific and, oops, put the wrong number in the ad. A week later, he wanted it out of his garage, so he sold it to me for $126. He has a bill of sale from the auction. I have a bill of sale from him. It is now mine, and there is nothing the company can do about it. But they tried. I now have a fully functional photography studio, all the contacts I need to start my own business, and the skills to do it. I started calling all the stores I had worked for the last 8 years and offered them a much better deal than what the company was giving them. I did my own pre-selling, my own photography, and my own sales. Except I took it a step farther. I bought a monitor and computer and let people preview their pictures and order the day of the shoot. They paid in full and I mailed the pictures directly to them. People loved it. No high-pressure sales, no tricks. My customers were happy and so were my stores. About 6 months after my first independent shoot, I heard from the company. I got several nasty letters from them, which I ignored. Word had gotten back to them that I was using their equipment and that I was working for someone else. I just laughed at them. They thought so little of me that it never occurred to them that it was my business. Then I got a nasty legal letter from a lawyer. It started with cease and desist, rolled into me violating the non-competitors agreement, and ended with the return of their stolen property. They had apparently not told him all of the facts. I sent him copies of everything. I waited a few weeks for a response from him and heard nothing. I finally called to find out what was going on, but no one was available to take my call. How convenient. A few days later, I got a certified letter in the mail saying no other legal action will be forthcoming from this office. I would have been content to just let it slide, but this whole thing ticked me off and now I wanted blood. I made a real effort to really hurt them. Little by little, I built my business and my reputation. I didn't have to do any of the nasty tricks that the jerk did. Within a year, I had stores and schools calling me. I had more work than I could handle on my own, so I took on a second photographer, then a third. I actually hired 4 people out from under their noses. At the height of my business, I had 8 additional photographers and a full-time office assistant. I could have grown much larger, and in hindsight, I am so glad I didn't. Digital photography was a huge boon to the industry, and then it backfired. I found my niche in the market just as it exploded. I ran the company completely out of 3 states. They lost all of their chain contracts to me, including the store where it all blew up. The jerk lost all of his stores and ended up working at a gas station. The boss ended up demoted because his district was dissolved when I sniped the contracts. The jerk actually tried to convince one of my photographers to hire him to do the pre-selling for her. By now, my name and my business name had a really good reputation. Boss left the company for good and used me as a personal reference. He was a good photographer, just a rotten manager. And I took great joy in telling the people who called me that I was legally not allowed to tell them what I thought of the man. The age of the cell phone camera pretty much destroyed traditional photography, and I closed my doors as a business in late 2017. The company closed for good in 2016, and I would like to think I had a hand in that. I'm still standing, and they are nothing but an empty building. I still have the original rig, but the camera has been replaced several times. I do senior pictures and the occasional venue shoot. Most of my photography is for restaurant menus now. People ask me if that's boring. I've never had a meatball scream, cry or kick me, which is pretty much a daily occurrence when you work with kids. This may not be as epic as some on here, but I beat them at their own game, and that still feels pretty damn good. The revenge was a masterclass. After being lied to and mistreated, the photographer quit, cleverly placing the company's equipment in a storage unit and allowing it to be auctioned off, eventually buying it back for a fraction of its worth. Using that equipment, they built a successful independent business, poaching the company's clients, undercutting their contracts, and hiring their employees. As the business flourished, the company crumbled, losing its foothold in several states. It was a deeply satisfying revenge. The next story is from SC2 Superjack. Mock the disabled? Justice is served many years later. This is a story about a piece of shit receiving their deserved karma several years later. Many years ago, I worked in the lovely career of retail. It's sadly normal for there to be a constant flow of shop scum that make you despise their existence, and there are those that are so horrific that what they do is burned into your mind forever. Fortunately, one of these unforgettable moments allowed me to extract my revenge. I had only worked in retail for 1 year in this newly built store and was starting to settle in. Getting to know the great customers and understanding that some people shouldn't be allowed outside, which, being a shy person who hates conflict, wasn't the best. But at least one of my customers was an absolutely adorable elderly lady who always made time to talk and was an absolute joy to be with. It had been some weeks since I'd last seen her, but one morning I see her car park into the disabled parking bay, as she already has a blue badge. Only this time she hobbled out of the car on crutches with a pot on her leg. I didn't have chance to talk to her yet when a works truck, which did not have a blue disabled badge, pulled into the disabled space next to her, and out jumped an early 40s builder with their teenage kid. Well, this little old lady was having none of this and must have absolutely massive balls of steel, and stood up to this ignorant builder and politely informed them that they shouldn't be parking there as it's for the disabled and he doesn't have a badge. What happened next? I can't forget. This builder decided the best course of action was to humiliate and insult this poor elderly lady in crutches, accuse her of faking her disability and claim the cast on her leg was a fake, and that she probably milks the benefit system for as much money as possible. Then walks off putting on an overdramatic fake limp, laughing away with their teenage kid, whilst the old lady stood there in shock. Sadly, being one who lacks courage, I did absolutely nothing about it, and that would stick with me forever. I tried feebly to ask a manager later to do something about it, but they didn't care or want to get involved. For years, I worked in this store, always seeing this scum builder come in and out. Fortunately, I never interacted with this scum builder, but I saw them often, and every time I did, I would always remember what they had done vividly. I would still see them park in the disabled bays, and even got to the point where I would recognize them by the large blue Mercedes they drove. 7 years later, I was still working in this store, and this scum was still parking in disabled and looking like an absolute cunt. Yet this year, I was blessed with good fortune, and our store was outfitted with some absolute joyful equipment. Due to the high number of complaints, our store had set up a company to deal with the parking violations. But instead of having external parties coming in and ticketing cars, the staff of the store were given the ticketing machine, and it was our duty to go to the car park and record any cars that violated the parking rules. This was all done digitally, and there would be no paper tickets upon the cars. This was brilliant. As soon as I found out, I knew what I was going to do. It didn't take long for me to learn how to use the machine, and it certainly didn't take long for the opportunity to get revenge. And so it began. There were 3 rules for parking, and if you break these rules, there is a lovely $80 fine in return each time it happened. The first rule, no parking in disabled without a badge. And I know well that the scum builder is certainly violating this rule, and it wasn't long until I saw him next, and as soon as he entered the store, I quickly scurried out with the ticketing machine, and lo and behold, there was the oversized blue Mercedes in the closest disabled bay, with no badge. I smashed them car details in with some well-shot photos and sent the report off so that they would receive a lovely letter of their fine they would ask to pay. That's not enough though, but fortunately it takes weeks for them to finally receive the ticket, which grants me the opportunity to constantly ticket their parking violations. Because as you would expect, the scum would always park in disabled. And as I worked at the front of the store, I would always know when they had parked. After ticketing their car dozens of times, the scum unfortunately learnt their lesson, as their oversized blue Mercedes no longer appeared in disabled parking bays. But as you expect, the scum would still be scum, and they would find their new parking space inside child parking. Rule 2. Don't park inside child parking without a child. Had this scum gotten enough, I thought? Of course, not they haven't learnt their lesson and continue to be a complete wanker and park in the child parking, which we didn't have many spaces for. At this point, I knew all their car details by heart and would gleefully fill out the ticket machine as I skipped over to their car violating the child parking and take the photos needed for them, including shots of their cat seats that bear no child seats in them. And as it became routine, this once again carried on a few weeks more of tickets being created, and eventually they start receiving the fines. Fortunately, me being me, I am completely invisible to others and often looked over, and I have yet to be seen or caught. But as all good things must eventually come to an end, when the scum came into the shop, Their blue turd automobile was no longer there in child parking or disabled. Has the scum finally learnt their lesson? Would you be surprised if they had not? As it didn't take me long to find them. Rule 3. You must park inside a marked bay. And what a surprise the scum still manages to fuck this up. They would park over the line, taking 2 spaces up. Well, guess what? That's a job for me and my ticket machine. Trying to park inside taxi parking but can't fit the big-ass car in it? Boom, that aren't inside a marked bay and catching another ticket and fine for the have one single wheel slightly over the white line of a bay? Well, guess who technically broke the rule? That's right, scumbag did. And there goes a few more weeks of fun, until eventually, Scumbag runs out of ways that they can possibly break the rules, and our company hires externally to start ticketing cars, so my beloved weapon of justice goes to rest. Now I know what people are probably going to say, that all these fines are not enforceable because of blah blah blah, but I honestly don't care for a few reasons. Firstly, I'm being paid to do this, so either way, my time or money isn't wasted. Secondly, it did have an effect as they repeatable changed their parking habits. And thirdly, even if they don't end up paying, they are still going to spend a fuck ton of the time and effort trying to overturn them over and over again, having to constantly be harassed by mail. Overall, if all the fines are counted separate and added up, they would have received thousands of pounds worth of fines building up over time for being scum. Cherry on the top. About 3 years later, I walk by this piece of scum on the car park and watch as they scream at some innocent dude in a high-vis jacket, accusing them for being the one giving them all parking fines. Which put me at peace, knowing this must have seriously got to them and cost them to still be raving mad after 3 years. Short version, I give someone many small parking fines adding up to the thousands of sextons for insulting a disabled lady several years earlier. The revenge came late, but it was kind of perfect. This is what a random retail worker could do for a disabled lady. Initially, OP didn't have any means to inflict revenge on the builder, but when the store introduced the parking violation system, OP didn't miss any chance of finding the builder. Kudos to OP. The next story is from MU Funny 7588. My sister doesn't want to free her live-in unpaid maid, so I got her fired. Obligatory backstory. Many of you have probably heard of families with strong hierarchy structure, normally with the eldest in the family having the most influence. My family is one of them, except that my parents are drug addicts deadbeats, so my eldest sister, 31F, our entitled mother, raised all 5 of us. She is the boss of the family. She says, jump. Everyone says, how high? The focal point of the story is my youngest sister, 20th, who I'll call Little Sister. Most of us have a handful or at least a couple of memories with our mother before she lost her shit, except for Little Sister. For her, entitled mother is the only mum she ever had, and entitled mother knows how to take advantage of that. All of us noped out of our parents' house as soon as we turned 18, except for entitled mother, who waited until Little Sister and our brother were raised and in their mid-teens to move across the country, and soon found jobs and accommodations for all of us to move to the same state as her. Little Sister begged for years to move in with her, but entitled mother always denied, saying that somebody had to take care of our father, and because she and her new husband needed privacy and space. That was until entitled mother got pregnant. She got Little Sister to move in with her, and she has been there for the past 2.5 years, helping out. Now, to the story. Entitled father's family wanted to visit for a couple of weeks, so Little Sister had to stay with me for that time so that they could use her room. It's worth noting that entitled mother didn't ask or let me know about it. She just dropped Little Sister off. One day, she saw me studying for my master's degree and said something about how she always wanted to go to college. And this is how it went. Me. So why don't you? Little Sister. Oh, I talked to entitled mother about it, but she said not everyone is the college type, and that I wouldn't have time to work, study, and take care of niece at the same time. And it's expensive. Me. Most people work and study, and at the same time, and she can put niece in a daycare. I'm sure it wouldn't be that much more expensive than what she's already paying you. Little sister. She doesn't pay me. She already gives me food and shelter, and if I need money, I just take a shift at work. And this is how I learned my sister was not only babysitting, but also cleaning the whole house for free every day. She was even only working 8 hours a week at her normal job because she was too busy taking care of our niece. Long story short, it took me weeks to convince her to apply to community college, and then more weeks on the actual process, but she finally got confirmation she would start in September. All of that behind entitled mother's back. She was planning on telling everyone the next time we all got together, which would be Independence Day. But before that could happen, entitled mother got everyone together at her house to announce that she was pregnant. Little sister starts crying because now she wouldn't be allowed to go to college. Entitled mother gets deeply hurt and offended that she planned this behind her back. I butt in. Our other siblings butt in. It's just generally a mess. How could you do this to me? Who's going to take care of the babies? I can't believe you'd be so selfish. If you like OP so much, go stay with her. These were all some of the things she said. She kicked me and little sister out, who stayed with me until they made peace. Both of our siblings reached out, one to say that I should have minded my own business, and other to tell me she was on my side but wouldn't say anything. After that, little sister moved back with her and didn't go to college. But they agreed she would get paid $6 an hour and be allowed to take more shifts at her job until the baby is born, and then go to real college after the child turns 1 year old. I know it's messed up, but all of them, especially little sister, worship entitled mother like a god. I waited a year to act on my revenge, making sure my sister had saved enough money to live on her own. The revenge. First, what I did was research the legality of paying a homeless person in food and shelter. In the US, and depending on the state, it's legal as long as you do not cross the line and the person becomes an employee. For example, you can give the person a list of tasks you want done. However, you cannot say that it has to be done in a certain amount of time. You also cannot request someone to be somewhere at a certain time. You can ask, but not demand on the time. It comes down to a choice of words. Also, you have to comply with rental laws. If your local laws say that you must give 30 days notice to a tenant, then you must give 30 days notice to this person as well. I had proof of all of the situation. Several screenshots of entitled mother admitting not paying and not allowing little sister to move out, get a job, and also admitting to kicking her out whenever she wanted. All this technicality seemed worthless since no one would sue her. But that didn't matter. I just wanted to make sure that her boss knew that if she were to be sued, it would be a sure case. Entitled, Mother works for a civil rights attorney's office, so discovering she has a literal modern-day slave would probably get her fired. I could have just created a burner email and sent it all to her boss, but then they would explain to her why she's getting fired, and that would get me and little sister in trouble. So what did I do? Entitled, Mother was always complaining about one of the bosses on her job that hated her and had tried to get her fired for ages. I went to the company site, found the woman. Thankfully, she was the only Ashley that worked there. Found her on Instagram and Facebook. There she had a post tagging her yoga studio. Went to said studio and created my membership. It took a few weeks of trial and error trying to find exactly what class Ashley belonged to, but I finally found her. Then I went to yoga class every Tuesday and Friday at 8 a.m. for months, slowly building a friendship with her. Around 3 months in, she asked to follow me on Instagram, and I was already prepared for this scenario, having deleted the few pictures I had with entitled mother. After 9 months, when our friendship was a strong baby, I brought up the crazy coincidence that I found out she worked with entitled mother. Before things could get awkward, I said, "It's ironic that she works for civil rights, considering, everything." That got Ashley's attention. I told her everything, showed every screenshot. I could practically see her eyes shining. They had their own history that is not important to the story. All you need to know is, entitled mother is a bitch. Ashley wants revenge as much as I do. I told her about little sister situation and why entitled mother couldn't ever know about this. This is why being friends with Ashley was so important. If I had just sent them the proof and explained the situation, they would have probably just ignored it, since this was a very legitimate reason to fire her, and they wouldn't risk firing her for a minor mistake and maybe getting sued. I sent her the files with her promise that entitled mother wouldn't hear about this, but she needed it to convince the other owner, who was the reason why she wasn't fired yet. 2 months later, entitled mother was fired for minor mistakes, lateness, and general bad productivity. Small victory, sure, but I loved coming to visit her during the 4 months she was unemployed. She was looking so tired and miserable all the time since she had no money to pay for a babysitter, and little sister is away at college, so she actually had to take care of her children. Moral of the story: check on your siblings. They might be living in a modern slavery arrangement. The revenge was perfect and strategically planned. After discovering her little sister was being exploited as an unpaid maid, OP befriended her entitled sister's boss, Ashley, at a yoga studio. After months of building trust, she revealed proof of the exploitation, giving Ashley all the ammunition needed. Entitled mother was fired for minor mistakes and bad productivity, leaving her miserable and without help. Meanwhile, little sister was able to escape and go to college. It was really satisfying. His story is from disgruntled_veteran. I'm not the vice principal anymore? Okay, so this happened at the end of this school year. I posted what was going on in the art teacher group, and several of the people there told me to post what happened in here. This story is in 4 parts, and I apologize for the length. I also apologize for any teacher slang I use, as it is like second nature to use it, just like military cargo was when I was in the military. Basically, I was told that all the assistant/vice principals in the district, other than at the high school, were being let go, and a teacher on assignment, TOA, was going to take our jobs. I was not heartbroken over this, but was treated badly by the new admin team, taking my job and my principal's job. Also, I tried to help my staff on my way out, and it seems my bosses cared more about their images than my staff's happiness. So here is the story. Part 1. So none of the other admin in my district had received our contracts for the coming school year yet. I was wondering what was going on, but I heard rumors about a pay scale shift, and that was the reason for it. I found out Wednesday what is actually happening. Every assistant principal and vice principal in the district, why we have 2 different titles, I have no idea, is not getting renewed contracts, except the ones at the HS. Their positions are being eliminated, and their jobs are being replaced with a new position that pays a teacher's salary plus a $2,000 stipend. They are replacing the APs with learning coordinators. Apparently, the budget is the given reason. But I also heard rumors from someone at the district office. Each of us, APs, VPs, were scheduled to meet with one of the AST supers Wednesday. We thought it was about our contracts, and we were correct. When I arrived, the acting superintendent was there with the head of HR. I was told about the elimination of my position, but not the reasons why. I was then given an option for the coming school year. I could go back into the classroom, I could work in the district office, or I could apply an interview for the new positions that is replacing my job. WTF. I wouldn't care one lick if I was told that my position had been cut completely and I needed to go back into the classroom. I love the classroom. I miss teaching full-time. However, to tell me to apply and interview for a job I already have is bullshit. We were told to give the district our answers by Friday, and they would draw up contracts or schedule interviews. Wednesday afternoon, I went to see Tony, who is an AST, superintendent and one of the few decent leaders in the school district. I heard from Tony that there was an internal shake-up, but he wasn't allowed to talk about it or even give me a hint about what happened. However, one of the AST supers was being reassigned, aka demoted, to being the principal of my current school. My principal was not coming back due to health reasons, the superintendent was released from his contract, and my school's new learning coordinator position had already been filled. Who filled it? A school counsellor from one of the high schools who just happens to be a friend and lackey of the AST. Sup. That is now the new principal. So early this morning, I gave them my answer. I decided that I didn't need until Friday to decide. I tried to make sure I sounded professional, but I made sure that my message was getting across by speaking with authority. I went into the acting superintendent's office and told him that I thought that laying off a bunch of people so they could hire others to do the same job, but at less pay, was bullshit. I told him that the way the school district handled certain situations was idiotic. I then gave several examples. I next told him that he was going to ruin a perfectly good school with an amazing team of educators by putting a lazy, mean, parent-pleasing person in as its new principal and letting her put a lackey in as her second in command. I said that she was as useless as a screen door on a submarine and as mean as Dolores Umbridge. I finished the 3-minute speech by stating that I will work my ass off and finish the school year strong. I will prep things for the next school year so that the teachers have an easier time. I also let him know I would never work at or recommend the district to anyone ever again. Then I left letting him know that I expect an amazing letter of recommendation by the end of the school day Friday afternoon, since I earned it for my service the past few years. So, what am I going to do now? Well, I called up an old friend Wednesday who is currently a principal at a STEAM charter school that's part of a chain of charter STEAM schools and asked if he had a teaching position available. He's been asking me every year for the past 5 years to come work for him. He told me he had 3 openings and I could have my pick of them. So next year, I will be a, drumroll please, 6th grade teacher. And I'm very happy about it. I even get to design my curriculum as long as it meets state standards. I could apply elsewhere for admin positions, but I think I need a break from school leadership. I need to love my work again like I used to as a teacher. Yes, there are many challenges and sometimes I hated going to work, but I do love being a teacher. I feel bad for my current staff because the regime change will hit them hard, but there is nothing I can do about it. I wish I could help them. The most I could do would be to take a teaching position at my current school, but then I would be miserable with them and be helpless to do anything to aid them. So, for myself and my daughter, who I love more than anything, I am making the move to a new school and going back to what I enjoy doing: teaching. I am even bringing my daughter to my new school to start next year as a 5th grader. I asked her if she wanted to stay at her current school or go to the STEAM school with me, and she wants to go with me. She was excited since she has visited there several times and loves the technology room, the robotics class, and the science labs. Plus, she is friends with some of the kids there already. As a goodbye to my self-staff, I am going out this weekend and I am going to buy some nice letter paper and scratcher tickets. I am going to write short, individualized goodbye to each of my staff members, and at the end I will include the following words. I'm giving you some scratcher tickets. My hope is that you are as lucky scratching them as I have been lucky to have worked with you. So that's it. I have to finish my contract, but at the end of June, I am free. I am looking forward to teaching full-time again and having a boss who will let me just do my job and not interfere. I don't think I want to work in administration again, but maybe after a few years, I will decide to work as an AP again. Note: sorry for any spelling, jot, grammar, punctuation errors. I am writing this while making my morning rounds. Part 2. So I put together goodbye gifts for all my staff, and I'll be handing them out Friday, their last day with kids. They have a bunch of goodies that I posted about weeks ago. I was think this weekend about how to give the finger one more time to the district office and help my teachers out, even in a small way. So I came up with it Sunday night. My district requires each teacher to attend additional training throughout the year. These are outside of the regular staff development trainings. They are run by district staff, SPED teachers, and admin. The training normally lasts 1 to 3 hours, and the teacher gets a certificate for the time spent in the training. Each teacher is required to attend 24 hours of these before the end of the school year. Most teachers take them over the summer, if they are offered, so they don't have to take them during the school year. So yesterday morning, before work, I was making copies of the certificates for all the courses I have run here the past few years. Classroom management strategies, lockdown procedures, social studies strategies, math strategies, reading comprehension, and environmental print. I am going to fill them out with each of the teachers' names and number of hours. I am adding all the times I ever spoke to the staff about these topics and putting down hours to correspond, rounding up to the nearest hour. Wouldn't you know, each of those topics was 3 to 5 hours in length. Each staff member will have exactly 24 hours worth of training. I filled out the dates of the training for the 2022-2023 school year. Oh, and I have an attendance sheets with all of their names and have them marked as being present. Note: I checked with district, and since I am still an administrator into the summer, I am allowed to run these training over the summer before I leave. Now, they can have their summer to themselves and not worry about taking classes during the school year. They can if they wish, but 99% of teachers here hate the mandatory training hours. I hope the staff likes the present. Part 3. Since Friday, I am no longer a school administrator. I technically have another week to work, but I took vacation during that time because, well, screw them. Now, I spent the last week packing up, giving aid and comfort to my, now former staff, and causing problems for the new administrators who are assholes. Now, besides giving the entire staff a year free from additional PDs, I wasn't planning on causing any more problems. Just quietly leave and drive off into the sunset. Shane style. But no, apparently I don't deserve a quiet week. The new principal, demoted from ASTU Super, and her new teacher on assignment, TOA, decided for some reason to be rude to me. There was only one response to that. I aimed to misbehave. How were they rude to me, you ask? First off, they ordered me to hurry and clean out my office. Apparently, the TOA wanted to start redecorating my office. I was literally told, "Get all your personal stuff out of here ASAP. She wants her office now." I still had a week to work there and actual work to do. Second, the new principal tried to steal my personal chair and my personal office supplies and decorations. That chair was a gift to me from a friend. I found her just wheeling it out of my office and into hers. My desk supplies and a banner from my wall were stacked on its seat. I told her that it was my personal chair, not the district's. She said, "Okay." The very next morning, I found it missing. She had moved it into her office after I left for the day. Third, I was given a list of tasks to complete by Friday by the TOA, who is in no way, shape, or form my boss. These were not my job to do and are, in fact, the incoming admin's duty to complete. Stuff the new admin are supposed to do. Things like put together a new staff packets, schedule next year's PDs, fill out and submit request forms, etc. Finally, I was talked down to every single day by the new admin team. I was spoken to as though I were the hired help, and they were the royal bitches. Seriously, I speak to a waitress that messes up my order with 20x the amount of respect that they showed me. They actually tried to get my attention by snapping their fingers at me. Like that would work. Note: the new principal also has made some pretty anti-LGBTQ+ comments. I don't like narrow-minded people. So, I decided to as I was told. I was a soldier, so I know how to follow orders. I removed everything that was my personal property. That included my chairs, decorations, the stress relievers, punching bag, etc., the fridge from the office, and the file cabinets in my office. Yes, I bought government surplus cabinets because I didn't have any. All my files and all of my former principal's files were in there. I had even bought the manila folder I used in it. So, I took every piece of paper out of my cabinets, removed them from my labelled folders, and stacked them on the floor into one large pile. There is no order to how they are stacked. I took my chair from the principal's office while she was in a meeting with parents. I just walked in and rolled it out. She stopped talking to the parents to ask what I was doing, and I responded that I was taking my personal property out ASAP as I was ordered to do. I had an old medium-sized fridge I'd placed in the office workroom for office staff to store their food in. But it is mine, so I took the fridge. I brought in right out the front door and loaded it into my truck. I even took the new admin's food out of it and left them on the table. It's my fridge. I warned the rest of the office staff I was taking it, but forgot to tell admin. Darn. I copied all my digital files over to a flash drive and then deleted everything off my work Google Drive. Anything I personally created or designed. Copied all my emails too. I informed the staff that if they need time off next year and need it approved, to submit the forms to me this week. I got several, and they are all now approved. I got this idea from someone who messaged me here on Reddit and suggested I do this. Thanks for the advice. I approved every supply list item the staff submitted and even drove to the district warehouse to pick up some items personally. I even approved funds for a second-hand kiln for the art teacher. She found a good one on Craigslist. I had repaired my desk with bolts and tool from home. I took the bolts back. The desk is now lopsided again. The closet door was broken when I got there, so I repaired it. I have now put it back as it was when I was hired. The two-way mirror to the detention room was mine. I had gotten it from a friend at another school, different district. It allowed me to watch ISS and detention students from my office without them seeing me. It popped that right out and took it home. Now the TOA has a hole in the wall the detention kids can look through. I had put together all the lockdown buckets and fire drill bags myself with my own money. I took all of them back. This I felt bad about, but I will give them out to the staff at my new school. I put a rush order on all classroom and building repairs and have an approved order to have every classroom repainted. I assembled new staff packets and the new school year binders. Besides the basics of what is required, I have included throughout the binders in random places. Dilbert cartoons, famous Harry Potter quotes, the lyrics to Nickelback's How You Remind Me, I Kissed a Girl by Katy Perry, All Star by Smash Mouth, and We Built This City by Starship. A map of the area where I marked all the good places to eat lunch off campus. Funny Far Side teacher comics, cheesy teacher jokes, the union contact info, crosswords, Sudoku, and word searches. A list of educational lawyers, just in case. I also included in the binder the admin wife password for them since that signal is stronger for some reason. I went ahead and wrote out the PD schedule for next year. Oddly, every Wednesday is listed as free time or work in your classroom. I'm sure they will change it, but I don't know when they will find out what it says. I had a master list of donators and partners in the community. It was posted on a whiteboard in my office. I got over 4 dozen businesses and people in the community to help with various things or donate over the years. I spent a lot of my time building relationships with them and making deals. I took a photo of it and then I erased the list and took the whiteboard since it was mine. Friday, I flew the LGBTQ+ flag instead of the state flag. I also placed LGBTQ+ flags in each classroom in case the staff want to display them. Then I got yelled at 3 times. The first time was when I took back my chair. I was told it was unprofessional to just take it without asking, especially with guests present. I responded with, yes, it was unprofessional to take my chair without asking. The second time was when the TOA found the refrigerator gone. She said that it was community property. I told her, no, it's my property, and I was told to take all my property from the campus. The third time was when I was in the parking lot leaving and they found the piles of papers. The principal flagged me down and told me to clean it up. I told her I was off the clock and that the district never reimbursed me for the cabinets, so I had to take them with me. I am expecting a call from HR today asking for my assistant setting everything back up. Since with all my stuff removed and erased, the admin team has to actually put in some hard work. I'd come in. For my consultant rate, $75 an hour with a minimum contract for 12 hours. Part 4. So, as some of you know, I left the world of being an administrator a few weeks ago. I tried to leave behind some nice gifts when I left. I wasn't looking to cause problems my last few weeks, but the new admin team treated me in a way that was unacceptable. So I decided that Malcolm Reynolds had it right when he said, I aim to misbehave. Well, the Tuesday after I left, I received a call from HR. I ignored it. I then left for a road trip with my daughter where we went to San Francisco for a few days and went to 2 Giants games. Unfortunately, they lost both games. While we were on our trip, they called and emailed me at my personal email account. My work one was deleted by them. I ignored the calls and never opened the emails. My daughter and I then went to Disneyland for a few days of fun and then returned this past Friday. I then checked the voicemails and emails. I was asked, begged, and then ordered to come to the HR for important meetings. It is very important that we speak to you as soon as possible, is what they said repeatedly. So yesterday, I went into the district office wearing cargo shorts, a shirt I got at Disneyland, and flip-flops. I don't work there, so I don't need to dress up. When I arrived, I was originally treated like a visiting VIP. The HR manager and her assistant tried to butter me up like a Pillsbury biscuit. After a few minutes of them trying to make small talk, and me then letting them know I had plans to go to lunch in 30 minutes, they got to the point. They wanted me to turn over a few things took with me that, though they belonged to me, they said were sorely needed at the school. They gave me a list from the new principal, which included, but limited to, my chair, seriously, my refrigerator and appliances, my community contacts board, people, businesses that I build relationships and partnerships with, my personally designed forms and worksheets, two-way mirror, my lockdown buckets and fire drill bags. They also wanted copies of every record I kept and notes I took on the staff and students. The notes I took on the staff were so I could personalize gifts for them and have conversations with them on their interests. I said no to all those requests. I told the ladies that the furniture and appliances were mine that I brought in. I stated that the chair was a gift to me from a friend and that the new principal can afford to buy her own chair. I also stated that I left any official school district documents there and any I took with me and or deleted were of my own making and my intellectual property. I also stated that my contacts were developed over the years on my personal time and at personal cost to me. I also stated that everything I took, that I had submitted reimbursement, was never reimbursed. I kept my records and pay stubs. I never saw a red cent from those submissions. They offered to pay me for some of the items and gave me a rough figure of what the district would pay me to return the fridge, the forms, buckets, bags, mirror, and contact board. I told them that I did not want to hand them over to the new admin team since they had treated me so poorly. They asked me again and tried to reason that some of those things could be interpreted as school property. I told them that they were welcome to try and force me to return anything that was legally mine to them, but I would be willing to fight it in court. I also told them that those 2 new administrators made me uncomfortable and that their treatment of me could be considered making a hostile work environment, especially when they tried to make me do their jobs for them. I then gave the HR team my lawyer's info. Note, I dated a lawyer after my divorce for a few years and we are still good friend, and she has offered herself as my forever retained lawyer that I can use her name and she'd help me if she could. I rarely use her name, but when I have needed her legal advice, she always comes through. I also help her with physical chores when she or her family needs help. And I then wished the lady a good school year in the term to come and left. I doubt I will ever hear from them again. Wow, it was really a perfect revenge for the rude HR department and new admin team. It was really satisfying to see HR and admin team going down on their knees. The story reminded me of a quote, "Never mess with a teacher, you might learn a bitter lesson." Our next story for this video is from immortal_heathen. Manager insists I do my job properly. Happy to comply, sir. Preface. In early 2020, I was hired under the title Assistant Manager at a local automotive shop. We mainly sold tires, if you're American, and alloy wheels for passenger vehicles. The company owned several stores. I reported directly to my manager, who then reported to the owner of the company. Shortly after I was hired, I noticed the behavior of the manager was far from professional. He would constantly mock and berate me for being the new guy. I believe part of this was jealousy and insecurity on his part, as I ended up recording more sales under my name within the first few months. He would also knock off work early and start drinking beer whilst the rest of us continued to work. I remember when he found out that I participated in MMA training sessions after work, he tried to goad me into a fight for his own amusement. Clearly, this guy didn't like me, and I was starting to get the feeling that he was trying to get me to snap or lose my cool, and as a result, my employment. I became even more certain of that with what happened next. Story. During the few months that I had worked there, I had noticed that our takings for the day and sales records did not match. I would often spend half an hour to an hour after work trying to figure out where the errors were coming from, whilst the manager would simply throw his hands in the air and exclaim that he had no idea how this was happening. The recurring issue seemed to be that our cash takings had been recorded incorrectly. There would sometimes be an excess amount of cash that didn't match up to what was recorded on our sales invoicing software. Other times, there would be less. I was, at the time, an accounting student studying towards my bachelor's degree. I was already suspicious of the cash being out each day. However, given how the manager had been treating me up until this point, I was concerned that any complaint would somehow be twisted and used against me. And boy, was I right! Several weeks later, my manager took some time off. During this time, I managed a personal record in store sales and also noticed something interesting. The cash was never out at the end of each shift. I reported this directly to the owner of the company. Given I was acting manager during the time my manager was away, I was expected to report to the owner every day and explained what had been occurring whilst the manager was there. In all honesty, I was hopeful that the owner would be having a word with the manager about the discrepancies. However, I was also weary, as I believed once the owner spoke to my manager, that the manager will immediately know it was me who reported this. When the manager returned to work, he immediately approached me with a disgruntled look on his face. "I've spoken with the owner. You tried to blame me for the discrepancies. You should focus on doing your job properly, then this wouldn't happen." I was quite taken aback by how angry he was, though. I wasn't surprised that he twisted it and tried to place blame on me. Given his reaction, I'm even more suspicious at this point. He wants me to do my job properly, eh? Malicious compliance ensues. That same week, I got to work. I started paying attention to what customers were paying when they were dealing with my manager. Behind his back, I began examining all of his sale transactions and invoices with a fine comb. As the days rolled by, I started to find evidence of his dishonesty. When it came to a few cash sales, my manager was doing the following. Example. 1. Would tell the customer the price is $200 if he pays cash. 2. Would discount the price by $50 in the sale invoicing software. 3. Would put the extra cash into the till and record a $150 cash sale. 4. Before we did the cash up at the end of the day, he would sneakily pocket this extra cash whilst no one was around. Though he was very foolish, as he clearly couldn't remember the exact amount he had swindled, hence why the cash would be up some days, didn't swindle enough, or the cash would be down, swindled too much. End. I took screenshots of the discounts he had been giving on sales and sent them to the business owner, along with a report with a detailed description of my findings. The report also showed that on all days he wasn't there for the cash count. There was no variance. When he was there, well, the owner was infuriated. This man had been his trusted employee for years. The owner was so infuriated, in fact, that he ordered my manager do a mandatory drug test, pee in a cup style, on the same day he found out. And no surprises, he failed. Turns out the manager had quite the meth habit. This was most likely his sole motive for stealing cash, and the owner was beside himself. We operate machinery every day in this store, and so the thought of a manager walking around high as a kite wouldn't sit well with any health and safety professional. In fact, it could have landed the owner in serious legal trouble if any accident or injury occurred under this manager's watch. The manager was terminated immediately for violation of his contract and was later taken to court by the owner in an attempt to recover the stolen funds. Safe to say, I was promoted to store manager position shortly after his termination. The manager accused OP of not doing his job properly, and OP exposed manager's fraud with all undeniable evidence, engulfing his job and reputation in the market. Not only this, manager had to return the money he had stolen. It was really a destructive revenge. The next story is from Ork Lemon. Don't mess with an engineer. I worked for a company that provides specialized equipment used in manufacturing. To protect my anonymity, I'll have to be vague about what exactly this machine does. During my time working in this field, I got to know many clients who would need these machines installed and serviced. One of these customers we'll call Jake. I later left the company too for a different job, but Jake apparently kept my number. One afternoon, I got a call from Jake that they wanted a new unit installing and another unit needed maintenance and wanted to know if I was available. I let him know that I left the company, but that I could pass him on to someone who could help. He tells me he'll pay 2x my current rate to install the unit over the weekend. He lets me know that the company has increased the rates for installation and the company just can't afford it. The instructions they sent over just aren't clear enough, and their engineers are scratching their heads trying to figure it out. He begs me to consider it, and I agree. For more context, installing this unit can take a good few hours, or up to a day, on your own. The company gives you two options. You can either pay for an engineer to come and install it, or you can save money and they will send instructions so the customer's own engineers can install it. The instructions aren't easy to follow, and it's company policy that if someone has started to install the equipment, the supplier wouldn't get involved since they couldn't verify that any of the pieces were broken. This will be important later. I drive down on the weekend and they show me the boxes of equipment. I set to work and I make good progress installing the unit. Around 6 hours in, and I'm stopped by Jake, who greets me. I let him know I'm nearly finished and he tells me, "Sorry, but they just don't have the budget to pay you." He understands my frustration, but his engineers can take it from here. To say I was frustrated was an understatement. I wanted revenge. There's a small button inside the unit that changes the unit into test mode. This is done to maintain on the unit, but it's impossible to configure the unit with this button pressed. It's only possible to reach this button using a pin, so it's not easily pressed during installation. Because of this, the installation instructions don't mention it. There's no real way of telling the equipment is in test mode. It just won't work normally. I think you can guess where this is going. I click the button, collect my things, and leave. Monday morning, I get a call from Jake. I declined. I knew my old company wouldn't get involved since I already started installing the unit. I knew his engineers would never figure it out. I just had to let him stew. A few days later, with many missed calls, I finally pick up. Jake is furious. He asks me where the hell I've been and why I haven't been picking up the phone. He tells me they can't figure it out how to configure the machine, and they need my help. I tell him, "Why is this my problem? You won't pay me." He told me he was sorry and they would work something out if I could get there as soon as possible. I told him, "Oh no, you're going to pay me $7,000 up front before I do anything." I'd never felt this powerful before. He screamed at me for a bit and hung up. He called back a day later after saying he's sorry for how he acted and said that if I could come fix it, he would pay me in a totally defeated tone. He tried to fight it, saying he'll pay when I was done, but I was having none of it. After a bit of back and forth, he agrees to pay me. The money hit my account, and I came in the next day. The look of confusion over his face when I took out a pin and changed the unit from test mode was priceless. It was even more priceless seeing his reaction to me, packing up my tools, and leaving after only 20 minutes of configuring. Easiest $7,000 I'd ever made. Don't try to mess with a professional problem solver. Really an epic revenge. Always pay engineers on time. And best lesson to learn from this story is that never bargain with any technical person until he or she has not completed the work. BTW, the best method to avoid confrontation is to decide service charges before starting work. The next story is from Echo 171. I went from school teacher to chairman of the board of a big company for the sake of revenge. When I was a tiny kid, my father was my best friend. He worked multiple jobs to support my family, all while powering his way through law school. He even built a couple of small businesses from the ground up with a couple of his friends. All while doing this, he managed to be the best dad ever, spending as much time as he could with my mother, myself, and my baby siblings. One day, we found out that he had stage 4 stomach cancer, the kind that you don't recover from. My mother and I stayed by his side all the way till it was all over. The last memory I have of my father was when he was completely immobile, practically a vegetable at this point, with tubes going in and out of his body, and me just praying that he'd still be able to remember who I was. All the guy could do was smile at me, just to let me know he still recognized his son, even if the doctors told us most of his memories would be gone. Eventually, he fell into a coma for some days before waking up to say goodbye to my mother, who was by his side when he died. She was a housewife, so we really didn't have much to go on after his death. Enter my grandfather. He was one of those self-centered boomer types who makes everything about himself. After my father died, he'd used the newspaper obituary to boast about his dead son's grades and achievements, which I realized seemed to be the only thing my dad was to him. Just in case you were wondering, yes, we are Asian. My mother was grieving and trying to find a way to make ends meet, and my grandfather graciously offered to help her control my father's 2 businesses to help support us. My mother agreed because she didn't have any experience. While we grew up, the 2 businesses didn't provide much for us, likely because my father was one of the big reasons they were thriving. Mum was in and out of multiple jobs just to keep us floating. My grandfather offered to help put me and my siblings through school. I managed to score some scholarships with some good schools growing up, so thankfully he didn't have to do as much for me, but we were really glad that he helped out with my siblings. After I made it out of school, I found out that my family was broke, and my 2 siblings were still making their way through medical school. My sister even offered to stop and just get a job, but I told her to keep going because she was doing so well, and that she deserved to graduate. My grandparents had cut us off because they didn't approve of the directions my siblings took in life, especially my sister, who was, for them, too female to have a career in medicine. My grandmother is a bit of a misogynist. Why are you wasting your time and money becoming a doctor? You're just going to have children and quit. I was working as a high school teacher when I was contacted by one of my dad's old business partners for one of his companies. After I asked him about how the company was doing, he told me that my grandfather, who was still in control of my father's shares, was siphoning money from the company for himself, and he was earning way more than he was giving me and my siblings for our education. So all our lives he'd been making us feel indebted to him for money that was supposed to be ours to begin with. And he lied to us by telling us that Dad's companies weren't making any money for us at all. We also realized that when he cut us off, he was cutting us off from our own money, forcing my siblings to drop out and give up careers that they'd been working their whole lives for. What's worse is that this was our father's money, and we know that he'd wanted it to help us provide for our futures, even after he died. And here comes his asshole father basically shitting on his legacy for his own enrichment. I even found out that he used his position to take possession of the company's office space and forced them to set up shop in a smaller, cheaper office while renting the original space out under his own name to the company's competitors to make money from them too. All while I had to work multiple jobs to help my mother and siblings pay the bills. Cue revenge. My grandfather's biggest weakness has always been his pride. In fact, I suspect that he wanted us to think he was helping support us out of his own pocket, because he wanted everyone to think he was some kind of hero when in reality he was financially choking us. I recognized that no matter what my grandfather said, my siblings, my mother and I were legally the owners of my father's company shares. So after having a statement signed by the 3 of them, I approached all the board of directors sans my grandfather and let them know that I was now that sole representative of my late dad's estate. My grandfather also made himself chairman of the board. According to the company records, he did no work for the company at all, so the position was just a name that allowed him to receive money. So I convinced them that, since he was only chairman as representative of my father's estate, that made me the chairman. I did not intend to keep the position because I did not have the experience for it. Then I contacted other members of my extended family about my grandfather's unethical practices with the company's office space. He was eventually pressured by them into evicting the company's main competitor from their office space. Serves them right for conniving with my grandfather to take the company's old office space. At the next board meeting, I prepared for the moment I'd been waiting my entire life for. When he entered the conference room to preside over the meeting as the chairman, he found his chair facing away from the table with all the board members already seated at the table, and like a Bond villain, I spun the chair around to reveal to him that I'd been the one sitting there the entire meeting. I told him that the company and my family no longer needed him, and that I'd be taking control over representation of my father's estate. "Do you know that I'm the one who put him and his siblings through school?" he said in shock. I only went no. Dad did. The look of sheer embarrassment on his face was perfect. I've never seen him look defeated my entire life until that moment, and this sort of satisfaction could not be achieved by simply ratting him out. I stepped down from the chairman position and took a job in the company's treasury department as a bookkeeper with a meagre salary. But at least now any profit sharing or dividends that the company released would go where my father wanted it to go. And finally, one of the first decisions I got to make as a board member before stepping down was to give my mother a permanent job that she deserved. My grandfather is now jobless. He spends all his time at home, and because he spent his life being selfish and self-centered, he has no friends. All he had going for him was being able to power trip over other people and boasting about his assets and achievements. Even my grandmother has had it with him, and the two don't even sleep in the same room anymore. I hope he lives the rest of his short life regretting that he didn't live his life with more compassion and humility. Edit. I've gotten a lot of comments about the legality of what went on. During all this, the only lawyer working in the company was my grandfather, and we all know he did jack shit. When we hired a team of actual helpful lawyers, they told us exactly the same things you guys pointed out. They're still trying to clean everything up so we don't get into big trouble. Update. Apparently my sister saw this post and just informed me that he's kinda miserable now because his wife is angry at him because he siphoned what's left of their money to an extramarital sugar baby he had in probably another attempt at getting someone to affirm and glorify him. I guess he hasn't learned. The revenge was epic and executed strategically. OP ousted his grandfather from his seat as chairman and humiliated him in front of the board for stealing from the company. It was truly the ultimate revenge and a very difficult task to complete. Our story is from Alexander J. Mason. How I Destroyed a $1 Million Company. This story takes place from 2007 to 2014. I went to school for television production. I worked in a TV studio on several TV shows and documentaries and was so good that I later opened up my own video production business. But the thing you need to know about this industry is that the starting cost can be massive when you begin. You can't do the work unless you have the equipment, so at minimum, you need to spend $25,000 on equipment before even opening your doors. And so, during the first couple of years when my company was still in the red and paying off the cost of equipment, I decided I would take on a side job that could provide a consistent, livable income. With my previous experience in TV and being an expert at several different types of equipment, it was just the edge I needed to get into a position at an upscale luxury hotel in my city. By upscale, I mean it was the luxury hotel. One of the oldest hotels in the Midwest and the fanciest non-chain hotel in the entire state. Think the Plaza Hotel of the Midwest. Let's call them Fancy Hotel. It was 2007 and I was just starting out as their brand new audio-visual technician. As an AV tech, I literally made all events at the hotel happen. A few hours before your event, I would be the one in the ballroom setting up everything. The lights, sound system, projectors, screens, and even some stage elements. I was the difference between your event looking impressive or your event happening in a bare bones room. If your event called for it, I would also be the one in the back of the room operating the tech table. This is one of the areas my previous experience in the TV studio came in handy. I was already used to the high-paced experience of operating a live event, so I was right in my element. After the event, I would then have to strike the room and get it ready for the next event. I was good at my job. Very good. So good, in fact, that within 6 months of being hired, I became their lead technician, meaning it was my call to make sure every event was set up and ready on time. I managed a team of 3 other techs and made sure every event was ready to go. I can honestly say that I've never missed a deadline on an event, even when turnaround times in a ballroom were measured in minutes rather than hours. I learned in the TV industry that when the event starts at a scheduled time, no matter what, the show must go on. So I always figured out a way to make it happen. A little background on how the fancy hotel ran. I had several layers of bosses. Immediately above me, there was the director and the salesperson. The salesperson handled the months of planning, contracts, and billing of clients, and the director was the linchpin that connected all the activities of the hotel to all the activities of the AV department. Together, we were just one branch of a larger AV company that we'll call Alpha AV. Alpha AV is a nationwide company that has locations in hundreds of hotels across the country. My branch of Alpha AV worked for Fancy Hotel. Along with having the event guests at the hotel as clients, the hotel itself was also considered a client. Alpha AV was under a contract that granted us residency at the hotel. Fancy Hotel would throw all AV business our way in return for a percentage of the profit, as well as providing all hotel AV needs for a reduced cost. Hotel events could be as simple as a projector and screen for a weekly staff meeting, or could be as difficult as a huge company event for the parent company. The hotel is owned by a large corporation, we'll call them Billion-Dollar Corporation, or BDC for short, that owns several upscale luxury hotels all over the country. But the home office for BDC was only 3 blocks away from Fancy Hotel. So Fancy Hotel was the flagship hotel for the entire corporation. The hotel that BDC would hold all its events at. The hotel that was always under the microscope and held to the highest standards. Over the years of working side by side with BDC, I made some pretty big connections. Since I was an AV tech with a video production company, I was able to negotiate that into a very profitable situation in which I started to handle the corporation's video production work when needed in connection to a hotel event. Whenever they had a presentation to give that required more than a simple PowerPoint, I made the video. So, needless to say, I became very well known among the staff at Fancy Hotel and the staff at BDC. I was also well known among the event staff and executives I worked with at the hotel. I had event planners, executives, politicians, and CEOs that remembered my name because I was that guy that made their large events happen. They trusted me. I was sometimes the only outsider present in a room where secret meetings were taking place. And I was even vetted by the Secret Service, so that I was the only AV tech in the city with the security clearance to be in the same room as the president. Those years with Alpha AV were some of the best years of my professional career, and I received constant praise and recognition from clients, the hotel, and BDC. But all things must come to an end, and in 2012, Alpha AV's contract was up. BDC had the choice to either renew the contract or go with a different AV company. Enter Beta AV. Over the last year and a half, they've been growing and moving into our territory. It was no secret that a couple of Beta AV's executives had the ear of some of the BDC executives, so it was no surprise when the decision was made that in order to cut costs, Alpha AV was underbid, and Beta AV would become the next resident of the hotel. Did I mention this was a national deal? For the last 5 years, Alpha AV had been the AV company at every hotel of BDC nationwide, and now every location was switching to Beta AV. When it came to our hotel, the flagship hotel, there was a stipulation entered into the contract. I had to come with the deal. I knew the clients, and the clients knew me. They trusted me. They knew the work I produced was quality, and it would ease the transition considerably. So there I was, traded like an asset in a multi-million-dollar deal. On one 20-hour day, in May of 2012, I moved Alpha AV out of the hotel, clocked out for the last time, and immediately clocked in with my new position as the lead AV tech for Beta AV and moved all their equipment in. Considerably less and cheaper equipment. The transition started out rocky, to say the least. The clients trusted me, and the hotel trusted me, but I could tell my new company still saw me as a member of a rival AV company, an extra person that they were required to hire. The contradictions started almost immediately. I had been running the storage rooms for 5 years, and so I knew where to store the equipment in the most efficient manner possible, but they made sure to correct me and make sure we moved the equipment in the way they wanted it. Over the next 2 months, they quickly learned that I was correct, and the equipment made its way into the proper spots. The AV office also went through some changes as it became off-limits for us technicians. It was to be an office for the director, the salesperson, and for clients. There was to be no reason for us technicians to have to cross paths with the clients. In the 5 years with Alpha AV and my years at Beta AV, never had a client actually set foot in the AV office. We always came to them, they never came to us. So all this new policy did was take away my desk and anywhere else for my technicians to sit in our downtime between events. Those were just changes that screwed with us technicians. Over the next year, the changes this new AV company made started to affect the clients. A pattern started to emerge which the clients began to pick up on. Clients who had the same event at the hotel year after year for decades suddenly noticed a steep rise in the cost of everything. And then, when the clients arrive and take a look at the ballroom, it's nowhere near as fancy as in previous years. In short, we were overcharging and under-delivering. I would try to slip our clients some of the equipment I knew they needed, but the new sales guy put a stop to it whenever he caught me. If they didn't pay for it, they didn't get it. A whole year of this occurred with clients getting bare bones for what they paid for. My reputation held for a little bit, but clients soon realized my hands were tied, and I wasn't allowed to give them the exceptional level of service they expected from me. Sales started to slow down, and events started to use outside AV companies more often. After a year of this steady decline, there was a shake-up in the hotel. The AV director took this decline as a sign that it was time for him to retire, and the sales guy moved on to another position. When they left, a new director transferred in from another hotel. He's taking on both positions as both the director and sales. The previous duo may have been bad at the job, but this new guy made them look good by comparison. How do you fix charging too much? By charging even more. How do you talk to your clients? You talk down to them and make sure they know that you know more than they do. I literally had to take an active role in pushing him out of events when he would start to openly argue with event planners. I may not have had official authority over him, but at points when he took things too far with clients, I was not above treating him like a child and banishing him to his office. Over the years, I built up my reputation in the city as the AV tech that everyone wanted to work with, and this guy could undo all my hard work and destroy my reputation in a single interaction. When this new director took over, the writing was on the wall. Beta AV was a sinking ship, and the captain of the flagship hotel was drunk with power and actively aiming for the iceberg. I was still friends with many of the executives at BDC, so I still had a sentimental connection to try to stick with the hotel and rescue it from the downward spiral. I had to figure out a way to retain the clients. But that's very difficult to do with the way the new director was crippling our reputation. Beta AV was corrupt all the way to the top, with policies that valued money and power over giving our clients what they need for their events. At our lowest point, we had staple events that were held consistently at our hotel for decades, suddenly switching to other hotels. Do you have any idea how much attention it attracts in a billion-dollar corporation when your AV company is responsible for losing the hotel millions of dollars in events? The decline was getting bad, and the final straw came when the decline affected the hours. We 4 technicians were lucky to get 10 hours of work a week. Clients at the hotel just weren't going with us anymore, and so there were not enough hours to go around. An AV tech doesn't work at a normal set time. They work only when there's an event to work. So if there is no work, then there is no hours. If there are no hours, then there is no pay. And as an AV technician, you need to be ready to go whenever an event was scheduled, so having a supplementary part-time job to fill in the gaps was impossible. We had it. I started to orchestrate a little operation in our massive amount of free time. We all started looking for new jobs. And by us all, I don't just mean the 4 technicians at Fancy Hotel. A similar decline was happening at all the other Beta AV hotels in our area, and so I convinced every technician in the area to start job searching if they weren't already doing so. As luck would have it, our job searchers were all receiving some very promising results at roughly the same time. So a synchronized event was possible. Now, nothing can be proven I had anything to do with it, but a friend of mine at Alpha AV, my old director who was now promoted into an executive position, may or may not have been given a sufficient head up on what was about to happen. A hint or two may have also made its way somehow to a couple of friends I still had at BDC. BDC was really getting pissed off at Beta AV, but they were locked into the same 5-year contract and had no choice but to endure the decline until the contract was up, unless something significant happened to break that contract. Suddenly, within the same week, every AV tech in the region put in their 2-week notice at the same time. This happened, seemingly coordinated right before a large event at Fancy Hotel for BDC. As I said before, Fancy Hotel was the flagship hotel where BDC held all their corporate events, and now the only one left to set up and run their largest event was the lone incompetent Beta AV director. This problem created a massive ripple effect through Beta AV. The biggest yearly event for their biggest client at the flagship hotel was in jeopardy, and they did not have the manpower to deliver what they promised. They were in breach of the contract. But lucky, Alpha AV somehow heard about all these problems coming up and was able to swoop in and provide the most impressive AV setup BDC ever had at their event. This series of events really impacted Beta AV's worth as a company, and Alpha AV was glad to step in and make Beta AV an offer. Alpha AV ended up absorbing Beta AV. All equipment and personnel became part of Alpha AV. Alpha AV also absorbed the existing contract, which BDC was happy to allow them to do. Alpha AV moved back into every BDC hotel nationwide. Events returned to the hotel upon hearing this news, and the reputation was restored. My plan went exactly as well as I hoped it would. The mass quitting I organized was the final nail in the coffin to take down a multi-million-dollar AV company. Alpha AV was able to expand back to the size they were before and is still at all of BDC's hotels to this day. BDC was hemorrhaging money due to Beta AV, and they were quite relieved to be rid of them. Unfortunately, the story never really had a happy ending for me. As I mentioned, I held on to the position for far too long. I should have gotten out 2 years earlier than I did, and in those 2 years of minimal hours for minimal pay, I ended up in a financial black hole that I just finished digging myself out of last year. My car was repossessed, my condo was foreclosed, and my business was forced to close its doors as I had to sell all my equipment just to get by. From that point on, I was forced to give up on following my dreams and instead follow the money instead, to get positions that paid big rather than positions that allowed me to do the kind of work I love to do. Beta AV took everything from me, but I can proudly say that I was the one tech responsible for taking out an entire company. The revenge was strategic and calculated. Beta AV's practices destroyed OP's career, but OP took revenge by coordinating a mass resignation of all technicians just before a major event, ruining the reputation of the hotel due to the lack of manpower. This event ultimately led to the crippling downfall of $1 million company. The next story is from Rectio Shit. Partner with limited authority over management. Playing from workers' dugout though. I had recently partnered with a small production facility in my area. Our contract was based on capital investment, along with implementing new automation processes. 2YR Outlook finished in 8Mo. Was a typical small production facility comprised of 50 production workers through 2 shifts of 12 hours that ran 2 days on then 3 days off. Also had 2 production supervisors for each shift and 1 maintenance supervisor for each shift. The people and their attitude is ultimately what led to my decision to be more than an outside contractor for this company until I worked the night shift for a week due to shutdowns that needed to occur to implement certain line upgrades. This is where I met him. We will call him Richard Head. Richard seemed like a nice guy in our first few encounters, and then I heard him in his element directing his maintenance crew at night over the radio. He would belittle this group of guys who were there to do a set task list every night for whatever machinery they were doing preventative maintenance on, unless something broke on the line, which would require attention first, obviously. I have never heard grown men spoken to like this, and never heard any nasty remarks back, or defending themselves. He would call them stupid on the radio if they were having trouble troubleshooting a problem, call some fat and lazy, called one black guy the ni-tas. The guy had been there since they opened the doors, and to be honest, made me want to rescind any commitment I have ever made to this company. When I escalated this up to the plant manager, he assured me that it was friendly banter, and they rarely had complaints against him. True, because anyone who ever did so in confidence of anonymity was always outed and then singled out until they were terminated by him. Since no one was going to listen to me, I decided to do my due diligence and started to document everything I heard on the radio with a date, time, witnesses to the treatment, and what rights the individual was having violated due to our state and federal outlines. I made this spreadsheet my entire time in the shift, documenting every personal account I witnessed as well. Harassment is a major problem with industry work, but the one that I have learned is the company killer is retaliation. If you can prove that, then they stand no chance. I saw him one night tearing down this 50-year-old man who requested 2 days off to the point I wanted to lose my cool, but knew it would ruin all the information I was gathering. Days off were because his nephew was just in a car accident 2 days prior and had to have multiple reconstructive surgeries scheduled. I knew that now was the time to move on everything. I rounded up all the maintenance guys and shared all my documentation with them. They didn't realize the importance of this information like I had. They just said, nothing will change. Nothing changed because no one treats an issue as an issue if you come with incorrect, non-detailed information. The fact that he used the radio so much was a godsend that they didn't see as well. When he spoke this way to people, he must not have ever realized that there are other supervisors on shift, and that they unintentionally became the strongest witness in the cases, especially when you have some audio recordings verifying the accounts. They have no choice but to acknowledge what they have heard. Each worker took their logs, and even though I have a capital time investment in this facility, I urged them at a minimum to petition to have this man removed or to threaten legal action. Once they coordinated a day to expose all this, it was like watching a sports movie when the underdogs take the championship and get the girl at the same time. Not only did the man finally get fired, but the entire atmosphere around the place changed more than I could imagine. Older machines ran the best they have ever run in my time there, and people loved coming to work again. They also put a placard on my door for when I came in about a week later. It said, "Mo one boss," but the boss was crossed out, and hand engraved under it was the word "badass." I obviously removed it from my door, but I put it in my home office, and is probably the best thing I have ever received from a facility. OP did a wonderful job by documenting verbally abusive behavior of the supervisor, Richard Head, towards the maintenance team and showing it to the higher authorities. This finally led to his removal. This incident turned OP into a hero. Here is a very interesting pro-revenge Reddit story. Landscaping owner rips my friend off of $400, so my friend makes him incur $15,000 in expenses. Word of note, this is not me, but posting up here for a friend who currently resides overseas. Long story, but worth the read. A while back, my friend was selling some stuff online, and among the items was a water heater. You know, the ones you see in every community hall, church kitchen. It was in working condition. He threw it up online for $150 and got an email from a person who runs a landscaping business saying he'll give him $100 cash today. done. 2 weeks later, he got an email saying that it's not working. Weird. So my friend offered to give a full refund or cover repair cost if it's under $100. The guy instead sent an invoice for $400 saying the repair's been done, and if my friend doesn't pay it in 48 hours, he'll send a debt collector after him. He paid it, out of fear, and emailed him the confirmation. The landscaping owner then emailed back saying, "This is the price you sometimes have to pay when selling second-hand electronics," followed by, "Have a great day, don't let this hold you back," with a E at the end of the email. A month later, my friend was in a bar, and he overhears a girl talking about how her boss, who runs a landscaping firm, screwed over some dumbass selling a water heater. My friend said, "Oh damn, I got to hear this. Do you mind if I join your table?" And the girl said, "Sure," and told the story. Her boss had brought a busted water heater from a second-hand store for $25 and a working one for $100 and billed the seller for the repair for the busted one before he sold it on for $300 to some community group. My friend asked, "Who did this so I don't hire that guy to fix up my yard?" Ha 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 has all around. She says the company name and, lo and behold, it's on the email of the guy my friend sold the water heater to. He was the dumbass in the story. He told me he was pretty angry about it, but COVID then hit, so he had other stuff to worry about. 18 months later, he was browsing the website he originally sold the water heater on, and he saw a bunch of landscaping materials, shovels, gardening stuff wheelbarrows, lights for working at night, drills, nail guns, some construction materials, and a generator. Now, in my friend's location, apparently, if you're selling a generator, then you need to have a warrant of fitness for it, proving that it works, it's safe, no flayed wires, etc., etc. Most people ignore it. And he saw that this generator is being sold by the landscaping firm. This generator, he said, just by looking at it, there was no way in hell would it have a WOF. Word of note, failure for a business to provide a WOF upon request for a generator after 2 weeks. When reported to the official departments and enforced by the court, the punishment is a hefty fine, and the courts often force the seller to refund the affected party and pay any costs that they incurred. Evil plotting music.mp3. He talked to his flatmate who agreed that they would go 50-50 on the generator, but he would transfer the money. Now, my friend had never met the landscaping firm owner face-to-face when selling the water heater. He left it outside, and pickup was confirmed via his security camera, and when he gets there, it was clear that the owner, this old grumpy-looking man who enjoyed yelling at his employees, had emptied out his storage unit. The owner was very much, as it is, no refund, and the flatmate showed him the transfer confirmation, and they take the generator for $800. No warrant of finesses provided. They then took it to a friend of theirs who is an electrician, and he agreed to check it and give an invoice for repairs, and to quote the friend, "It would be cheaper to buy a new generator, and to be honest, this generator shouldn't have been sold. It should have been scrapped." They also found that the main identifier number had been scratched off, but not a second number that is often recorded as well on WOFs for tracking purposes. So they got in contact with the seller, telling him the cost for repair, around $5,000. He promptly tells them that he's not paying, as it is, no refund, to which they then asked, "Have you got the warrant of finesses for this generator?" Silence for 2 days. They followed up with another email asking for it. No response. They then ask again and get an email from him saying that he'll take it back for $800. They said, "No, we want the WOF," and they get no response. They emailed him every day for 2 weeks, nothing. So they printed out the original item listing that had been screenshotted and had been archived on the website and reported him to the website, and then the government. 4 months later, my friend is in court, and the guy went up to him. He tells him that he will take back the generator for $800 and that my friend and his flatmate will be going in to tell the judge that the seller has refunded them and that they want it all dropped. And that's what's happening here. Full stop, end of story. They are doing what they are told to do. My friend said no. So they went into the courtroom, and it's over very quickly. The inspector the government sent out to inspect the generator stated that it was in poor condition, shouldn't have been sold, was highly unsafe, and that the seller had tried to get the generator a WOF in early 2021, but instead had been told that it was to be repaired or scrapped and that it was not to be sold. They identified it by a second number on the generator that they took down in the original attempt to get it WOFed, which had not been scratched out like the first. The judge ordered the landscaping firm owner to refund the flatmate the $800, pay the $5,000 for repairs to the generator, and was ordered to pay a $10,000 fine, which would be given directly to my friend's flatmate as the affected party. When they left the courtroom, the owner was furious and told them that under no uncertain terms was he paying them a penny more and that he couldn't understand what he had done to deserve such treatment. To which my friend said, "Remember the water heater?" He gave him a very confused look. "Remember the water heater you brought for $100? Well, I do, because I sold it to you. And I know that you had a different one repaired and invoiced me for it." His jaw was on the floor, and to hit it home, he said, "It's a bitch, isn't it? When what goes around comes around, especially when it accumulated interest. You have 48 hours to pay, or a debt collector will be contacted. Remember, this is the price you sometimes have to pay when selling second-hand electronics. Have a great day. Don't let this hold you back." And they left. He paid the $15,000 2 days later. My friend and the flatmate split the $10,000 50-50 as they agreed, combination of rent payments and study stuff. The generator they got repaired, and then got a WOF for it before selling it for $1,000 with a newly replaced identifier number. They then went out for a wonderful dinner and night out in town. In short, old landscaping owner rips my friend off $400, so my friend makes him incur $15,000 in expenses. The revenge was ultimate. After being ripped off for $400 by a manipulative landscaping owner, OP's friend waited for the right opportunity to strike back. When the landscaper sold him a faulty generator without the required warrant of fitness, OP's friend used the law against him. He took the case to court, where the landscaper was ordered to pay over $15,000 in fines, repairs, and refunds. The next story is from Reddit admin Dumb87. You should always pay your accountant, especially if you got skeletons in your closet. My buddy is an accountant. He has his own firm. His biggest clients are small to medium-sized businesses. Well, he had a client who owned 4 different clubs/bars in 2 different cities. Client was always shady, always slow on payment, etc. I was also a customer of one of the bars. They had poker game that I would play in on Thursdays. Well, one day, I'm at my buddy's house having a few beers, and he's bitching about non-payment from a client. I ask who. He doesn't want to say. But it's really bugging him because it's a significant chunk of change. He then says the name. We'll call him Scott. I'm like, "Wow, Scott isn't paying you?" He then says Scott is saying business is way down, and I think that's odd. I've been going to one Scott place, and every Thursday is packed. My buddy looks at me and goes, "Really?" I go, "Yeah, he does this new cash discount think, 15% off your tab if you pay cash." My buddy goes, "Really?" I tell him about my experience at Scott Bar, and eventually the topic changes. A few weeks later, my buddy calls me up and says, "You going to Scott's Bar to play poker?" I said, "Yay." He says, "Can I join?" I go, "Sure." He joins. We get a few drinks in us, lose our money at poker. My house is closer. He decides to crash there. On the way over, he breaks down his theory. He thinks Scott is vastly underreporting his revenue. The reason why he suspects Scott is offering cash discount is because cash is easier to hide. He says he's going to do a deep dive on Scott's finances. My friend tells me his plan is to go all 4 of Scott's establishments, get the prices he charges at each place, pieces together how much alcohol he's buying versus how much Scott is saying his revenue equates to. He looks up how much Scott is paying in payroll, rent, bills, etc. Keep in mind he has access to all this info. And he determines that Scott is basically using his credit card receipts plus a little bit of cash to cover his cost of his business, to include rent, payroll, insurance, liquor, food, etc. However, based upon the amount of products he's selling, he's suspecting Scott is underreporting his total income by about 35% to 40%. He goes back into Scott's books even more, and he figures in the last year Scott has been underreporting his sales by 35%, 40%, but he's also been underreporting his sales by at least 20% to 25% for years on end. Simply put, there is no way Scott is going through as much product and as much alcohol as he's purchasing and having the revenue numbers. That's, he's claiming, he's underreporting his sales to his accountant, which means he's also underreporting his earnings to the IRS. By this point, Scott owes my friend thousands of dollars that he hasn't paid. He said his total amount owed could buy a brand new motorcycle. He never gave me an exact number. My friend decides, fuck getting repayment from Scott, let's get repayment from the IRS through the whistleblower program. He's estimating Scott's underreported his revenue by millions of dollars over the course of years. The whistleblower fees he'd earn from the IRS far outweighs the amount Scott owes him. The IRS will pay between 15 to 30% of what they collect. So with the assistance of a lawyer, my friend gathers all the evidence he has Scott's underreporting to the IRS and files a whistleblower report with the IRS. During this time, my friend fires Scott as a client for non-payment. Now this part gets boring because there's a lot of legal wrangling and back and forth. This went back and forth. However, eventually the IRS comes down on Scott, and they come down hard. It's estimated that Scott underreported his income to the IRS by about $4.5 million. Now, my friend never told me how much the IRS was able to recoup, but Scott's businesses are no longer his businesses, and $4.5 million would put the whistleblower reward at $675K, $1.3 million. Keep in mind, it's based on what the IRS collects, not the amount that's reported. I've asked my friend how much he got in the end, and he simply says, I no longer have a mortgage, and it would have been much cheaper for Scott to just pay me. The revenge was brutal. OP destroyed the Scott when he refused to pay for OP's accounting services. Our story is from I Am Herding Cats. I'm a team builder. A few years ago, I was sitting in a job interview, and the hiring manager asked, what do you consider the greatest accomplishment of your career? This gave me pause, as I've been doing the same thing for over 25 years. I let the mists of memory transport me back in time. Dorian, the nurse manager. Kip, the program manager. Dr. Steve, the clinical director. Yes, I had 3 bosses. I started on the unit as an already seasoned, jaded RN, and soon discovered that most staff who worked there were very, very young and inexperienced. For many, this was their first real job. They assumed all the weird stuff that happened every day was just normal for the workplace. Dorian had decreed that no one was allowed to write incident reports for med errors or safety issues because it makes me look bad in safety huddle. Non-clinical staff allowed to pass meds, schedule changes without notice. Additionally, the department was easily the most toxic I've ever worked in, with various cliques at constant war with one another. I could go on and on. The troubles began one day when I opened my email to a message from Dorian which stated very curtly that I was being investigated for an incident which had happened on the unit, that I was to meet with HR to discuss it, and for possibly disciplinary action. I was not to discuss the incident with anyone. No date was given, no medical record number, no indication what the issue could be. I replied that I would need the above information, would speak with my union rep, and meet at a time convenient for me. Dorian declined to give information. I declined to meet with him. I began receiving emails almost daily, each more threatening than the last. I printed them all, contacted my sister, the employment attorney, tried not to start shaking whenever I had to check my email. I was keenly aware that this is intimidation 101, but it is remarkably effective even when you know that. Because I'm not a direction follower, I was soon discussing this in the break room, and before I knew it had been approached by 3 other women who had all received the same email on the same day. Comparison showed the emails being sent about a minute apart. We did not work the same shifts nor the same days. We agreed to call in the union rep and refused to meet with HR. Dorian continued to escalate, including cornering us in the hall, stepping in chest to chest, and trying to stare us down. He was a very big guy. Before long, we were speaking to more and more women, and it came to light that Dorian had a habit of targeting them with this exact email, followed by others that were more and more threatening until the person would finally meet with HR, get written up for something vague, and then be forced to sign a non-disclosure, no retaliation agreement. It seemed that he had simply picked the wrong 4 women this time because we were not having it. I can't tell you how much time at work began to be spent with people crying while recounting their stories. None had thought to call in the union rep. They did not even know their Weingarten rights. We began to plot. We had limited time, and our company has a long and unglamorous history of protecting people like this. Before long, the entire team was united against the common enemy. LGBTQ staff wrote up statements, backed with witnesses, of grossly homophobic comments, often in the presence of patients. Staff who were immigrants made statements about racial slurs. A staff who was incredibly petty and vindictive had been compiling a dossier on every perceived policy violation and wrongdoing on Dorian's part since his hiring date, and he prepped it for presentation to HR. The graveyard shift, all huge men, said, "Obviously, Dorian isn't trying to flex on us, but we want to help." So they spent a couple nights cruising Dorian's social media posts and capturing screenshots of homo, trans, xenophobic, and misogynistic content. Worried that they hadn't done enough, the night staff paid for a cheap background check, and what a score. DUI, failure to appear, hit and run, domestic violence, assault with a deadly weapon. Did the company not do a background check? WTF? Finally, 2 women came forward with complaints of sexual harassment. One incident had even occurred in the presence of the assistant manager, and one was documented in an email. We were ready. We flooded HR with meeting requests, and our union rep coordinated the assault so that on Monday we met for simple harassment and intimation. I met first, and HR seemed unimpressed by my complaint. Tuesday, all LGBTQ and staff subjected to racial slurs made their formal complaints. They said that the HR lady looked tired. Wednesday started with the background check, moved into the minutiae of policy violation, and culminated with well-documented quid pro quo sexual harassment. The union rep informed HR that the union's attorney was eager to know how to proceed. HR assured her that would not be necessary. That evening, Dorian posted a sign on his office door saying he would be away for a few days and to contact Kip or Dr. Steve if we needed anything. Graveyard Shift reported that over the weekend, housekeeping came and removed everything from his office except his name tag, which the night staff took as a trophy. On Monday at shift, Change the CNO, COO, and HR met with the team and informed us that effective immediately, Dorian was no longer employed by the hospital. We all sat silently and politely until they exited the unit, when a loud and spontaneous cheer went up. People were hugging each other and cry-laughing. High fives all around. Aftermath. To the best of my knowledge, Dorian never worked as an RN again. Frankly, I don't care. Kip was fired 3 days later for having been aware of all that was going on and turning a blind eye, and because apparently he'd been touching women on the unit for a couple years. I hadn't been aware of that, but it came out in the HR meetings. Dr. Steve was also fired for sexual harassment. The unit hired an old manager of mine who had a long and well-documented history of, you guessed it, sexual harassment. I quit within days of him being offered the job. The department's foray into getting along crumbled. Most of the staff have moved on to other jobs where they seem much happier. What do you consider the greatest accomplishment of your career? I sat up straight, smiled, and said, I took a very fractured team and brought them together to achieve a common goal. I like to think I'm really good at team building. It was truly an epic revenge on the toxic manager who had been harassing and intimidating staff for years. Not only was he toxic, but he was also racist, homophobic, misogynistic, sexist, and had a criminal background. OP and his friends strategically overwhelmed HR with a series of formal complaints against the manager, which ultimately led to his removal. It was very satisfying to read this story. The story is from Infinitium Vortex. Director said, process contracts faster and don't fuss over details. Okay, you'll lose bonus. Initially had this story in RR malicious compliance, but came across this subreddit through comments. I work with a federal contractor, responsible to buy or bundle hardware, software, etc. any government organisation needs and review the contract in terms of financial viability and legal clauses. In other words, ensure we make money and we are legally covered. The contracts range from 5K to 40 mailers last year. Our company went through a reorganisation, i.e. fire people, and give more work to people still left with the company while paying us peanuts. We are a small company with less than 200 employees and trying to retain our government customers, while big companies like Amazon Cloud will replace us in less than 10 years. The government customers love working with us because this is the only thing we do and treat the customers better than big contractors who don't care. They laid off 30 people from my team of 50. So now, 20 people do the work for 50 people at the same salary. We are paid by the month and not work hours, and we don't get sales bonuses, important in the story. I have a habit of reviewing everything carefully and spending hours on each contract, even one that just makes us a few $1,000s. Government vendor selection process is slow and they are very risk-averse, so a lot of customers start at a few $1,000s and end up in an 8 or 9-figure contract if everything goes well. Since people were laid off, I was struggling with the work volume, and as a result, contracts were piling up. The sales director, i.e. different team, did not like me as I was slow, and also catching any tricks the sales team tried to play by over-promising the customer or something shady. Government clients, just customers, loved working with me, the support I provided, and was truthful regarding our capability and our drawbacks. This was something else the director hated me for since he thought I am tanking sales. However, almost all my clients were repeating customers for over a decade. Example: sales wanted a school district to buy outdated Dell Windows laptops while entire state was moving towards new, cheaper Chromebooks. Schools don't have budget, and whatever they buy stays for 5+ years. Sales were offloading expensive, useless stuff to get better bonuses, and also charge customer nearly $1 million to provide IT support for faults arising from ancient hardware. During my conversation with the school district, I shared examples of state governments in the Northeast buying Chromebooks and saving money while future-proofing the hardware. My job was to get best quote to customer and develop trust to sign a 5 or 10-year contract. So this school district bought Chromebooks, which were 40% cheaper and had less than 20% of the previously quoted IT support cost. As a result, sales team lost a few $1,000s in bonus, but we brought this customer with us for a 5-year contract. The sales director got pissed as I was working on small contracts at a slow pace and reprimanded me in front of our manager. The manager did not care and did not defend me and asked, "Why don't you follow what the sales director says and stop fussing over small contracts?" I said small contracts turn into big ones, hence I should pay attention to them as well. Mistakes in small contracts could harm us if the contract becomes big. I am struggling at work because you gave me the job of 3 or 4 people. At this point, he was shouting at me that I don't understand contracts. He has been doing this stuff for 5 years and he makes more money in a month than I do in a year, so I should listen to him and not question him. This was a bit insulting as I live in a shared apartment and am struggling to make ends meet while he drives an expensive luxury car and just goes out on fancy lunches with government employees. I asked the sales director to send an email with a list of suggestions to improve my work. He rudely complied and said, "Can you not even remember what I just said in the meeting?" His email said, "Do not review contracts less than $100K and trust sales team that due diligence has been done." I replied by copying my manager in the email that this could create liability in the future and want him to confirm again that the sales team will do financial and legal compliance themselves for the small contracts, and I need to stop revising small government contracts below 100K with no exceptions unless told otherwise. This was gold. Cue malicious compliance. Instead of 2 hours, I spent 10 minutes on small contracts and voila, backlog cleared and I am home by 6:30 p.m. Now, a contract worth 10K comes through. I found some issues with this contract since it said that we offer 30% rebates to our software providers. This was something we stopped doing 5 years ago, and now we just offer software providers a 5 to 10% rebate on contracts. Also, I knew the government client recently got a massive budget and was on a spending spree, part of my job. There is a high chance that this 10K customer will become $100 and the 30% rebate means we have to give $30 on top of the usual cost. But I remembered what the sales director said. Why don't you follow what the sales director says and stop fussing over small contracts? So 10 minutes later, I email, no issues detected based on compliance check by the sales team. As I mentioned, government contracts are slow. No one cared, so I raised the 30% rebate issue since it was just a 10K customer. 10 months later, the state government customer said they want to work with us and get at least the same terms or better terms for a new $50 million contract. This was the largest contract in our company's history. The sales director happily gave him a handshake deal that we will offer the same or better terms. Government can legally just buy more on their current contract, so the sales director had no issues promising the same terms. Given contract size, everyone from legal, IT and finance gets involved to work on just one contract. For 3 months, everyone worked on one contract. The sales team was giddy that they will get million-dollar bonuses. I don't get a sales bonus to ensure I protect customers and the company. The finance team finishes their review and said the company is going to lose $8 and not make any money. Everyone is shocked. The sales director gave a deal without checking with us, and we cannot go back on something we offer. Changing contract terms is frowned upon by the government, and they have legal contracts stating nothing will change. We are legally obligated to offer the government the same terms for 3 years. The legal team says we need to take a hit on our balance sheet and swallow the losses. The CEO called a big meeting in a fancy conference room with big TV screens, and everyone had to find a scapegoat to take the blame. Every department lead, managers, and people involved in this contract were summoned. The sales leader had to explain to his team why they won't get bonuses on this big contract they spent over 3 months. Finally, legal and finance meet and share their findings. We lost money due to the 30% rebate clause. The sales director goes crazy and blamed me in front of everyone and asked me to pack my stuff in front of 30 people. Follows by saying, I am terrible at my job despite 100% customer satisfaction. I calmly opened my laptop and connected the display cable and opened Outlook while displaying his email on 3 big TV screens stating that I should stop reviewing small contracts. While all 30 people read the email with a faint smile, I await the sales director's reaction. He goes into rage mode claiming I misunderstood his email and am terrible at my job. Then I scroll down where he ignored my warning regarding potential liability to the company, and his response explicitly asked me to ignore that. His face turned white when he realized he fucked up. He then blabbered, trying to find some other scapegoat making racist tirades against our IT consultants in Vietnam, and just lost it. Aftermath. I was told to spend 2 to 3 hours on each contract, and the company eventually figured out that it is cheaper for them to hire 20 people like me and pay us 70Ks every year than to take big losses on their contracts. Our team has 40 members now, still less than 50, but enough to offset the contract volume. Because of the losses, sales director had to pay back his previous year's bonus, as he had a clawback clause with the company, i.e., if you screw up, you need to pay us. The sales director had to pay nearly 300K and was fired from his job. Present day. He then sued our company for wrongful termination, and we just heard today that he lost the case and now owes us another 200K legal fee. Now he owes over $500,000 to our company. TL, DR, company fired people. And the sales director abuses me when I cannot do the job of 3 people. He ignored my warning that mistakes in small contracts could cause millions in losses to the company. He ended up causing the company millions in losses and gets fired from his job, tried to sue the company, and now owes over $500,000 to our company. End of TL, DR. Update 1. A lot of people may ask, why am I still doing this job which pays less than state wages, and I might be able to make more in other companies? I help government customers buy good stuff from many hardware and software companies so they don't overpay or rely on one big company. I feel proud when I can save tax dollars and help customers. During COVID, a lot of state governments went remote, i.e., local meetings on Zoom, and keeping the government running while working from home. There was a budget freeze due to COVID, the economy shutting down, and since COVID relief bill was months away. This was a time when the sales team had helpless government customers willing to sign anything just to get remote hardware and software. I saw this as extortion, and despite being an introvert who lacks initiative to get promoted, I was able to convince the CEO to offer free 60-day trials of expensive hardware and just charge setup and transportation fees. This was a big risk, but we brought an insurance company to offset any damages. I convinced the CEO that this is the time for us to show we are partners with the government, and it was an emergency. The sales team was mad for a month, then realized that all those free customers were calling us for paid contracts over companies that are 10x our size, that would usually win contracts by lobbying or taking government decision makers to expensive lunch or something like Super Bowl tickets. I legally cannot disclose the exact government entity by name, but can vaguely say that some entities in the state government of New York and the state government of Florida were both using this trial program during the first wave of COVID. I might change jobs soon, since we got a 3% salary hike in the current market, while the company has nearly doubled its revenue in a few years. Update 2. I just remembered another story that made sales leaders hate me even more. This is during the COVID wave when we all were working from home and I was getting used to Zoom. We had a telecom contract with the state government during COVID, and everyone joined a Zoom call to discuss the contract. The sales team was increasing this customer's telecom bills from $60K a month to $300K a month. I objected that increased calls during COVID are not high enough to justify such a big price hike, and we should increase the bill to $100K a month. This was enough to cover the cost and even improve profit margin percent. But the sales team started laughing and saying, if the customer can pay more and is ready to pay more, why am I being so vocal? Leadership asked me to shut my mouth and proceeded with a $300K contract. So I started working on other stuff and minimized the Zoom app. I don't end Zoom calls myself, as the meeting admin ends it. Everyone said, "Bye, nice meeting you all," and I naively assumed the call ended. I vented my frustration by saying, these salespeople are like wolves when the country is going through shitty times. A co-worker sent a chat message a few minutes later that everyone heard what I just said. No one complained or confronted me, but this offended them. Also wanted to add, all sales team members are not like this. Almost all the new sales reps are eager to learn from everyone and not pushing stuff, but talking to customers. However, new sales reps mostly handle small or low-priority contracts. Any big contract gets automatically transferred to sales leadership. Basically, it is not a revenge story. The story reminds us not to ignore even a minor detail when dealing with cash. A small mistake cost the company $8 million USD. By the way, when the director tried to put the blame on OP, he avoided it by showing the director's email, which resulted in the director losing his job. Our story for this video is from Vlokinen Ventileren. Keeping me up at night with your parties. Enjoy being shamed on the national news. In September of 2020, the apartment next to mine was let out to 2 young women, both students. After they settled in a bit, it turned out they wanted to have a party. No big deal, except Belgium was in full lockdown at this point due to COVID, and you were supposed to only have 1 fixed visitor over. But then again, to be young again, etc. So I didn't really care. During this time, I was working in healthcare. I work with the mentally disabled, but I volunteered for the ad hoc COVID team, meaning I got called upon to tend to those residents who were sick and needed quarantining, or were effectively diagnosed with COVID. This meant pretty long working hours, and I spend about 10 to 11 hours a day at work, with a full hour bike ride to and from work. Needless to say, I was pretty tired pretty much all the time. So I wasn't looking forward to the noise from a party, but I'm pretty chill and know that living in the city, some noise is to be expected. So they are having their party, and I can stand some noise and music. But this party was fucking wild. People shouting full on in the hallway, wrecking things, etc., etc. At about 4 in the morning, I introduced myself to the neighbours and asked them when they could expect their company, plus 120 people, to leave, and if they could refrain from having a party the next day, as I have to work and get up at 6 every day. So they promised they would keep it down the rest of the night. They didn't, and that they wouldn't have a party the next day. Plot twist, they did have another party, and then did another one the day after. At this point, I had been going a full 3 nights without sleep and was nearing neurosis. Every night I had talked to the girls, and every night they would be full of apologies and stuff, but nothing would change. I also felt terrible when I had to enter their place, because it would be absolutely packed with people, and I work with some very vulnerable people at work who I wouldn't want to spread COVID to. This was pre-tests, pre-vaccines, pre-much of the knowledge we now have about COVID. Luckily, the weekend came, and they went to their parents, and I could recover a bit. Suffice to say, I wasn't really liking my new neighbours. During the next few weeks, they refrained from big parties, but they would have a constant flood of people coming over during the night. And by constant, I mean constant. Like their bell would ring 70 times a night, and people would always be coming or going, and those people would be drunk and loud. Our communal hallway is pretty much an echo chamber, because it's all stone, and any noise will travel throughout the building. Basically, I couldn't rely to sleep at night. It drove me crazy. I could only sleep Friday through Sunday, because then they would go off to their parents or whatever. I couldn't grasp how they could know this many people that would always be coming and going. During one night, while knocking on their door to complain about the noise, I encountered my upstairs neighbour, who is also on Reddit High, and decided that we would have to join forces to get this to stop. My neighbour told me some important bit of information. The reason there were people coming and going all the time was because they used their apartment as a makeshift bar hangout. During this time, bars were closed due to COVID, and all those students were using the big apartment to hang out. Moreover, across the street was another frat house with 5 boys living there, and that too was a secret hangout. So people would hang out at those 2 places and cross the street if they wanted a different atmosphere or wanted to see their other friends, etc. And the boys from across the street would also come over 15 times a night. Most visitors seemed to be law students or affiliated with them. Basically, our communal hallway was just a part of their cafe space now. So we tried talking to the girls. Then we started to talk to the visitors. None of them had any sympathy for us when we were asking them to be quiet at 4 in the morning. Most of them just laughed at us, as we were the pesky neighbours, no doubt. Even more of them were just so wasted that they didn't know what they were doing. So we started calling the police dozens of times. Most of the times, they weren't let in, and police told us they couldn't do anything. We kept calling as we wanted a record of our calls in the system. Belgium was still in full lockdown at this point, and what they were doing was full-on illegal. Even so, police told us their hands were tied if they wouldn't open the door. When the police couldn't help, I turned to the next best thing. I'm a social worker, and so I have no problems looking up information and calling around to look for help. This is what I did. Most places, student unions, police, town hall, were understanding but couldn't really do much. So I acted on the suggestion of the upstairs neighbour and contacted one of the girls' dean. I shot him a nice email about sorry to have bothered him and taking up his time, but I had this big group of students from his faculty ganging up every night, and maybe he wanted to know about it since they were breaking every possible COVID rule that existed at that time. especially since me and my neighbour were about to go to the papers with this story, as secret lockdown parties were becoming a thing in the papers at this point. This dean called me back right away, and we had a nice talk about our problems. He told me he was on it. So basically what he did was call the law student girl and her parents. Big drama ensued, and we finally got to sit down with the girls, and they finally sounded like they were sorry. Tears were shed, for which I had no patience, TBH. We learned that the police had actually been inside a few times, and they were issued tickets for having secret parties. Those were €300 each a pop, so no idea why they didn't just stop. We learned they were not happy because the dean had called them up at 11 o'clock and they were still asleep. To which I said, well, there is your problem. You are still asleep at 11 o'clock. I'm up at 6 every day, and you girls haven't been a bit understanding about that. So we got to feel a bit like we got our revenge, and we got a vent, but we kept it kind of nice and parted in good terms, hoping that this would been it and we could live together as nice neighbours. But if that were the case, I wouldn't be here, right? You'd think they would have gotten the point now and would refrain from making noise and partying. Well, you'd be wrong. Basically, what they did was they moved to the frat house across the street and started partying there. There were slightly less people running to and fro, but the noise was still a problem, and we were now in the middle of the second COVID wave, and these people were meeting up with big groups like crazy, while I hadn't seen a soul in almost a year. Never mind the people at my work, who were forbidden from even going to their own fragging family. The whole thing was just ridiculous. My upstairs neighbour happened to film such a party across the street and had sent the clip to me. We were thinking about going to the press with our story, but weren't really sure if it would be a good idea. So I posted the clip of the party on the subreddits of our country to test the waters. It got quite some comments and upvotes, and it seemed most people were also sick of people disregarding the rules and having secret parties. After some talks with the upstairs neighbour, we decided to contact the press and simultaneously go up a step in the university hierarchy and contact the vice-rector that had the power to start up a disciplinary case against the students. This person is one of 12 vice-rectors for a total campus of about 15,000 students, so quite high up. Things moved fast. Local news actually picked up our story from Reddit and contacted me, and we gave some background info. They confirmed with the police that cops had been dozens of times to our address and across the street and weren't let in most of the time. We mentioned that the university was involved and that we hoped they would finally intervene. The next day, the piece was on their website. It went viral there and got promoted to the sites of most national newspapers. Its headline was sensational enough, mentioning the dozens of times police had showed up and also mentioning how healthcare workers were being kept up by selfish students. At the same time, the vice-rector contacted us to take our statements, which we already had prepared up on paper, and informed us they would investigate and could possibly start up disciplinary actions. At the same time, more reporters were contacting me throughout the day, and we made sure to mention that to her and link the university the printed articles. The next day, while at work, I got a message from the upstairs neighbour that a film crew from the national news was at our doorstep. He declined to talk to them, and I would have done the same since this was getting pretty big now, but they made a segment anyway. And sure enough, that night at 7, here was my street and a short section about cops standing in front of a closed door a dozen times and the local press cop talking about the troubles of closed doors. Best part about it was that a student from the offending frat house across the street had let the film crew in and said on camera exactly what we're accusing them of towards the university. That they had been having parties and didn't let the cops in, and that they had done it multiple times. No idea what made him think that was a good idea. Anyway, trying not to make a huge story even longer. The press died down sometime later, thank God, and the disciplinary action from the uni went through. Before the hearing, we sat down with the girls from our block and cleared some things up. We wanted to live like normal people together, and we tried to make some amends. Because we put in a kinda good word for them, they got the lighter end of the stick. 40 hours of community service and some probation. The guys across the street got 80 hours each, and each had to write us a letter of apology, which I thoroughly enjoyed reading every time I got one. Sad part is, most of them sounded just like dumb young kids, but that was after getting called out on the news and being part of a disciplinary action. But we never wanted to escalate things this far. Some noise is to be expected when living in the same building, and we were never going to go to these extremes for some expected noises. But these people went to the extremes, and so we were forced to do the same. Rest of the year, a simple message on WhatsApp was enough to silence any noises we had coming from their apartment. If anything, I hope they learned that even very polite and chilled people can become very upset when presented with sleep deprivation and excessive noise. TL. Dr. Neighbour frat students party full on in COVID lockdown, and I call the Dean and national news on them. They get shamed in the papers and on the biggest national news station and get scolded by their university. It is really an epic revenge on the troublemaker and lawbreaker during the COVID lockdown. It is shameful that law's students were in breaking the laws when it involved the risk of spreading a deadly virus. OP did a great job by exposing those students and humiliating them on national media. A very interesting pro-revenge Reddit story from Quiet Fangirl. Mom takes down the HOA from the inside. My neighbourhood does not have a homeowners association, at least not anymore. When my parents first moved in, my older sibling, maybe 2 years old and with me as a little glowworm, there was an HOA. They took money from the neighbourhood in exchange for their services. At first, and for quite a while, my parents just kind of shrugged it off. The HOA shoveled the snow off the streets in winter and dealt with trash collection, so they were doing something worthwhile, right? Ha! No. The city controlled the snowplows and garbage trucks, not the HOA. But still, there was the illusion of effort. And besides, one summer, they decided to contact a company to plant new trees all over the neighbourhood. The fact that the company was owned by the son of the head of the HOA was totally coincidental. The trees were the beginning of the end for the HOA. Why? Well, my grandma on my dad's side was visiting when they came around to plant the trees. My grandma, who is a certified master gardener. And so she stared through the windows of our house as the guys planting the trees just dropped the saplings on the grass. Still with their roots inside the bag, they came in. No holes dug, no holes cut, just a bagged sapling lying on the grass like a pathetic and sad stick. The saplings laid there all night. No one came back to actually do their job and plant them. My master gardener grandma mentioned offhand that those saplings were going to die unless they got in the soil. And something clicked in my mom's head. She was paying the HOA money, actual money, every month, while both she and my dad worked, taking care of 2 very little kids, sending us to daycare and preschool and arranging babysitters and feeding us. And the homeowners association was just going to pull this half-assed bullshit instead of do what she's paying them for? No fucking way. So she showed up to the head of the HOA's house and basically demanded that the trees get planted properly, like she's apparently paying for them to. The head of the HOA, so excited for someone actually caring about the neighbourhood, made their second mistake. They asked if Mom wanted to join the HOA. She agreed. The trees were planted, but most didn't make it. My grandma was right. First things first, my mum showed up to the next HOA meeting. There were like 5 people there. No wonder they asked Mom to join. They desperately needed the people. So Mom looked at this collection of white people, herself included, who weren't even paying money to the HOA, like the rest of the neighbourhood. All the contractors the HOA called in were close relatives of other HOA members and weren't paid by the HOA. After all, they're family. So my mom started digging. She spent pretty much a full summer taking down the HOA before she had to go back to teaching in the fall. With me carted along after her and my sibling, old enough to be in school or daycare, she dug through the years of paperwork detailing the HOA's financial situation. And she found something extremely enlightening. The HOA didn't actually do anything. Well, they didn't do anything to benefit the community. Everything they claimed to do was either covered by the individual homeowner or by the city itself. So they were collecting money from all the neighborhood residents under false pretenses, and actually, they weren't even supposed to be in our neighborhood. Their association's zone was a whole different neighborhood. So what is a working mother of 2 small children to do while her husband is off at work and she's off for the summer? She goes door to door with pamphlets. Me and my sibling in a stroller as she weaves her way through the neighborhood blocks. Pamphlets explaining the situation and how to stop paying for services you'll never get. Pamphlets that are, of course, written in both English and Spanish to account for the high amount of Latino and Hispanic people in our neighborhood. And naturally, she got a lawyer and an accountant. It put a major dent in her pocket, but if it meant the entire neighborhood wasn't exploited for money each month, it was worth every penny. Another HOA member helped her sift through the documents and data and pass out pamphlets and encourage people to show up to the meetings, but had to back out because of work-related reasons. My mom rolled up to the courthouse, flanked by the lawyer and accountant, her kids safe at home with her husband, and had more than enough evidence to get the Homeowners Association the fuck out of her neighborhood, expose the fraudsters for the frauds they were, and make sure that no HOA would ever push their luck in our neighborhood. It's been almost 19 years, and no one's even tried making another Homeowners Association in our neighborhood. TLDR. When dealing with a worse than useless Homeowners Association, get deep in the financials and lawyer the fuck up. Wow. What a revenge against the fraudulent HOA that was charging the neighborhood for services it didn't provide. The best part is that OP joined the HOA and then went door to door to inform her neighbors about what was going wrong with them. The final blow came when OP got the HOA permanently dismantled. It was not just revenge, but also a social service. The best example of volunteering. The story is from Few Understand Satoshi. You didn't get it in writing. No, you. Here is a story about the first job that I had a decade ago. TLDR at end. Disclaimer. Some vagueness ahead because both parties, the company and myself, displayed some awful behavior leading to some horrendous consequences for all in the name of revenge. Typos/grammar. Apologies. But these errors will be fixed in due course, so bear with me. The essence is all there for now. So I was a new but qualified recruit in a small team that was working with a very large client and stakeholder in the company. Despite my skills, it was my first real job fresh out of grad school, so I was inexperienced with office politics, contract law, power hierarchies, etc. The clients had given us an almost impossible task to prototype a complex solution to a technical problem that they had. As the only one in the team with the relevant expertise, the burden quickly fell on me to deliver alone while the others essentially managed. The team leader and effective boss promised me at the beginning that I would get a bonus worth roughly 30% of the salary on which I was hired. Apparently, this bonus was a direct financial contribution from the big clients themselves, and the wheels were in motion to get this extra cash. Great, but not really because it was not in writing. Over the next 2 years, however, no such bonus compensation transpired. I would periodically and half-heartedly ask about this bonus during in-person meetings, and I was verbally reassured it was on its way. In hindsight, I would have been more assertive and perhaps sent an email, but again, I was a newbie and unwilling to bite the hand that feeds, so to speak. After these 2 years, the company began to expand business with the client as a direct result of the work that I was on the impossible project. At some point, the clients even present all that hard work of mine at some international conferences, of course claiming it their intellectual prop and proprietary solution. Although the project ownership rightfully and lawfully belonged to them, the lack of acknowledgement left a bitter taste in my mouth. And worse was that money flowing around, and both companies were profiting from 2 years of painstaking effort, but there was no bonus in sight. So my work contract was also nearing its end in the 3rd year. Obviously, the company wanted to retain me to continue on this project. I was the only one who knew the ins and outs of it. It would be a joint employment between the company and client, as I would be tasked with transitioning the project from the company to the client, which would require several more years to do so. I also went through half a year of specialist training with the clients. Only I could do this job for the foreseeable future. For this, I was offered a decent increase in my salary, but that missing bonus was ruining my trust. At a contract negotiation meeting, I asked about it one last time. The team leader and boss said that they had no recollection of such an agreement, SOS offer, and that I should have got it in writing. Fair enough. Some lessons are learnt the hard way. But the worst realization was that the missing bonus, a measly 30% of the new hire salary for almost 3 years, was now earmarked for an intern to join me on the project. It was almost a one-to-one calculation, as the client would sponsor the intern with the funds that were intended bonus for me. It was the last week of the work contract, and Human Resources had invited me to double-check the document before I was to sign it. Of course, given all the time, money, training, and resources invested in me, continuing on this project, and my very real eagerness to do it, it was assumed that I would be here for the long haul, and the work contract was a formality. So what happened next is something that I do not recommend that anyone try at home, or work for that matter. It was a moment of impulse from a reckless youth. However, I was feeling particularly vengeful about this missing bonus. My ego had been bruised because I wrongly trusted them to follow through, but I was not clever enough to get the agreement in writing. Well, reverse card moment. There was also no written agreement on my end, so I had not yet signed contract. I carefully double-checked my emails, and there was nothing in writing where I agreed to continue on this project, or even this job. In fact, I had just been verbally enthusiastic about the project during meetings with my boss and the clients. The first new workday rolls around when I am officially no longer employed at the company or with the clients. I gave no notice and no warnings. I just abandoned them. On the previous day, I had left my company pager and phone in the office locker. I had to sacrifice a few personal possessions on the office desk. I logged out of the work email messenger system so they could not reach me. I am not sure how they responded because I ignored, deflected every single communication which came my way for following months. It was bliss knowing that I probably caused this company a major catastrophe for next few years at least. Of course, I could not predict the consequences that they would face from abrupt and unannounced exit, but I did not have time to care about them. I had to become selfish, and I had to dip into my savings and relocate and start afresh and anew in another city far away, which was very difficult without references considering the professional bridge that I had just burnt, hence the not recommending part. But eventually, my skills began to speak for themselves. The last I heard about the company was from an ex-colleague as we reconnected on an online professional network a few years ago. Apparently the company still exists, but it is a shell of its former self, as things went horribly south after I left. They lost the big client as I had anticipated. No one else had the skill set to do work. The clients are still players in the sectors, but I have the great fortune of not having had to interact with them, so far. But I could not have predicted the domino effect that followed in the company. A few larger clients followed soon after because staff had to be reshuffled to do my project, and these other clients felt neglected. Now they are downsizing and in the process of being swallowed by a competitor. From what I gather, the other big casualty of the revenge is my ex-boss developed some substance problem around this time to cope with this stress, triggered in part by not being able to contact me for months on end during a critical time in the company's expansion. Throw in a divorce too, because this work stress destroyed the marriage as well. I did a little bit guilty when my ex-colleague explained all this, and still do. Is it enough for me to right my wrongs and write an apology or something? Not really, but perhaps I am wrong here. I am open to suggestions. Note, this ex-boss has tried to get in touch with me a few more times some years after things went downhill, but I was too busy, so I just continued to ghosting strategy. But anyway, here is to Dumbass, Inc. I hope it was worth the measly bonus that I deserved. I was brought on as a new recruit, and I was a junior who had to lead the project from get-go. I had to work hard and learn new skills in the hours outside of work, so the fat clients and middle management to reap the rewards. Not on my vengeful watch. The reason that I am writing this is that it is somewhat cathartic. The company did some crappy things and so did I. But this missing bonus still eats me from time to time. I could have bought a house and I could have settled down in that old town. I wouldn't have been displaced for months and living with my head just above the water, having to rebuild myself for a good few years following that. Abandoning the project and the job was professional suicide at the time. But my revenge was such that whatever happened, I would try to get through life without groveling back to that company. Of course, this arrogant assholery of mine, born from this hatred having not gotten that bonus, still has at least one unwritten chapter. At the current workplace, where I am also a stakeholder now, I am now proposing a new version of that old project I began a decade ago and never got a chance to see to completion. It would be nice to showcase a patent during an international conference attended by those big former clients. That would be the real bonus. So yeah, mistakes all around with at best mixed ending for all parties. R/pro revenge by R/pro suicide, I guess, but at least it is finally good to get this in writing. TLDR. Company does not pay me a bonus because it was not agreed in writing. I abruptly abandoned them mid-project because my future employment with them also was not in writing. I continue to ghost them for weeks, months, years after this personal D-Day, and move on in life just to spite them. And it plays a central role in causing the entire business to crumble a decade later. The revenge was brutal. When OP was denied a promised bonus for years, OP realized that his future employment was also unwritten. So, he abruptly resigned in the mid of a crucial project, which cost the company its biggest client. And OP's ex-boss spiraled into substance abuse and a divorce. Although the revenge was satisfying and caused lasting damage, it also came with some consequences for OP, as well as he had to rebuild his career from scratches. The story is from Mercury Project. Saved my friend's job and burned my creep of a boss. So this is a story I have only shared a few times but always wanted to write down. It's long, so there is a TLDR at the bottom. When I was in college some 10 plus years ago, I worked for my university as a resident advisor in a dorm. It was a student job that afforded me a place to live, in exchange for managing a floor in one of the student housing buildings on campus. The job itself was fairly basic and consisted of helping students with housing issues, maintaining an office hour Monday to Friday, having a duty weekend once a month, and enforcing university policy. While I initially took the position for the housing, the dorm community aspect ended up being fairly enjoyable. Most of the policies of the university housing were common-sensey: no loud music after 9 p.m. or running in the building, etc. If someone was found breaking the rules, you would tell them to stop and document it in case the issue became a habitual. There were some rule infractions that also came with fines, such as smoking inside or damaging physical property. One of the policies that had a fine attached was getting locked out of your dorm. If you needed to be let back into your dorm, the university would fine you $25, and if you actually lost your key, then you would be charged $500 to re-core the door lock. The first year I was an RA, I never charged a student to get back into their dorm. I thought it was a bad policy, as being a poor student myself, I understood what $25 could mean to someone. The building's resident manager, my boss, at that time was about to graduate, and didn't care if we charged them to get into their room, and so everything was good. However, in year 2, I have my first meeting with the other RAs, and our new RM. We will call him Doug. Doug was one of those people who was immediately overly friendly, and because he was a friend, felt like he could come into your personal space. Stuff like touching your shoulders or arms while talking to you. It was in this first meeting that he assigned out all of the master keys for the building. He had 2 keys for each floor, which were inside a zipper binder, along with a key log consisting of the key's serial number and RA it was assigned to. This will become important later. He gave us each one of the keys and then placed the second on a duty set of keys, which were checked out on the weekend by the pair of RAs on duty. While the university policies for a student losing a key were bad, the policies for an RA losing a master key are worse. If you were to lose a master key, you would be terminated, thus losing your housing, and you would be fined the cost to recore each door on your floor. $12,000. While we all already knew this, I recall how much time Doug specifically spent reiterating this fact to us in this first meeting, and how he was no longer responsible for the keys, since we now had them. Several weeks into the semester, I am conducting duty rounds in the building with another RA, whom I am friends with. We will call her Brittany. Brittany is very smart, assertive, and always a laugh, so I loved working duty with her. This day, however, Brittany seems a bit down. After a bit of prodding, she confides in me that Doug has been making her uncomfortable and that he kept touching her. I believed I understood what she meant because I also disliked how touchy he was and how close he would get to me when we spoke. That's not what she meant. I talked to her about reporting him, but she did not want to, presumably since Doug was one of the department's golden boys. Brittany said she had had enough, so she told him off and didn't think it would happen again, but asked me to stick around her anytime he was around. After learning what Brittany told me, I asked another female RA who I was friends with what she thought of Doug. While she didn't claim he had done anything to her, she did express that she didn't like being alone with him. I decided he was a creep, and I became very brief any time I had to speak with him. I also made sure I would stick around after staff meetings until everyone left and would linger in the office doorway if Doug called one of the girls back. The year goes on, and I continue doing my job just as I had the year before. I document major and minor incidents, but I don't ever document letting students back into their dorms. One weekend, I am on duty and get a notification on the duty pager, Yara pager, from a student, I call them, and they are locked out on another floor. I grab the duty set keys and head to let them back into their dorm. In the hallway, I run into Doug, who asks what I'm doing. We have a brief exchange. I tell him I am letting a student into their room, and I continue about my way thinking nothing of it. The following Monday, I am called into the office. I am asked about the student I let into his room and how often I have to let people in. I am honest and tell him that I never charge the students and I do it several times a month. Apparently, because the students are informed of the policy and their responsibilities when they accept the keys, he considers my failure to charge them to be theft from the university. He had apparently reviewed all of the reports submitted under my user ID and seen that I had never charged anyone for being let back into their dorm, and told me that he was referring me for disciplinary action. The disciplinary action did not go far, or at least no one higher up ever spoke to me about that situation. For me, though, this drew a line that only served to reinforce my opinion of him. School continues, much as it had. A few months before the end of the year, I am again doing duty rounds with Brittany, who is clearly upset. Apparently, a few nights prior, she had a late night and a few drinks with friends. Early the next morning, a student had awoken her from her drunken stupor because they had locked themselves out of their dorm. Still half asleep, she grabbed her master key and let the student in. When she returned to her room, instead of putting the key up, she had instead set it on her counter, where it then fell into the trash. Awake the next day and not realizing what had happened, she took her trash to the dumpster, and it was gone to the dump before she remembered what happened. Brittany couldn't afford to lose her job, housing, and being fined $12,000. She was at a complete loss as what to do. After considering the consequences of reporting what had happened and deciding that was a bad course of action, we brainstorm and decide that we need to find a way, make a new key without anyone knowing. We didn't have long to act either, as each day ran the risk of a random key check by Doug. The university keys are made on a key blank that are not readily available at the local shops, presumably for this exact reason. So we scoured the internet looking for a copy and ended up finding one that looked like a match. However, the website's picture was just a silhouette of what the key's outline looked like, so we weren't 100% sure. It was our best option, so we ordered it. A plan was born. With our key blank en route, we decided that we would take the second master key on the duty set midweek, when it's not being used, and take it somewhere to make a copy. The next problem was once we had a working copy of the key, we would still need to find a way to get the key's serial number back on the copy. Luckily, Brittany knew someone with hammer stamps we could use to imprint the numbers on the key, and I somehow remembered the binder that Doug had with the serial numbers. Because Doug's office was across the hall from his room, he could always hear if anyone was in there. Since Brittany had bad experiences with Doug, we didn't want him to find her in there alone, so it fell to me. I waited till night on one of my duty weekends and got into the office. Done, I opened the door as quietly as I could and snuck in, leaving the door only slightly ajar so that no one in the hall could immediately see in. I was only halfway through looking for the binder when I heard his door open. Sure enough, Doug steps in and asks what I am doing. I know my heart was racing, but I had come up with what I thought was a believable lie. I told him I had to use the university computer in his office to file an incident report because my laptop wasn't working. The lie was good enough and he bought it, leaving me alone to continue my search. It only took a few minutes before I found the binder and got the key number assigned to Brittany. I went ahead and filed a bogus report on a minor infraction in case Doug checked and was out of there. Each day we waited to see if the key blank would arrive. The plan hinged on this key, and it was exhilarating feeling the plan beginning to come together. When it finally came, it was a perfect match, except for the large key brand stamped across it. There wasn't a way to cover it up, and it was too noticeable to pass as a real key. The whole plan seemed to fall apart. We decided we would still make a copy on this branded blank so that if Brittany needed to use the key, she could do so without being discovered not having her master key. Brittany waited till midweek and took the second master key off of the duty set to use to make a copy. Once she had it, we talked over the plan and joked about how nice it would be if we could just change the numbers on the second key to match the serial number of the first. While that seemed like it probably wouldn't work, we decided to look at how many numbers would have to be changed. It was 0. In our first meeting, where Doug had assigned us keys, where he stressed how we would be fired if we lost these keys, he had accidentally issued Brittany his copy. We realized we didn't have to do anything else, and Brittany put her master key in her lockbox. After 2 weeks, no one had noticed that the duty set was missing a key. Because we were tired of waiting, we had a student pretend to get locked out while Brittany was in town. The responding RA didn't have a clue and was confused why none of the keys worked, and they called up Doug. Doug couldn't seem to get any of the keys to work either, and so he called Brittany back to the dorm so that he could use her master key, a task in which she was happy to assist. When everyone realized a master key was missing, the big bosses got involved. There was a complete building search, a search of dorm rooms and multiple interviews of each RA. None of the RAs knew anything but Brittany and I, so we feigned ignorance along with everyone else. I believe they suspected Brittany initially, but when she was able to produce her correct master key, their demeanor with her drastically changed. The floor got recalled as you would expect. They never did figure out where that key had gone and thus couldn't justifiably charge anyone for the incident. We had a meeting where they basically chewed all of us out about keys and the importance of their security. While the meeting was for us all, a heavy emphasis was clearly directed towards Doug. Apparently, as part of his position, he was required to complete a key log each day to make sure that the keys on the duty set were accounted for. Unfortunately, he had not been doing so, and there was no way to tell how long the key had been missing. Like he had told me when he wrote me up, this was important since those keys were assigned to him, and he had been informed of the policy and his responsibilities when he accepted the keys. Since he was the boss's golden boy, they didn't fire him like we were all warned would happen. Doug did end up getting a substantial fine, and while I don't know the exact amount, I do know he was incredibly upset about it. The year was almost over, and Doug got moved to another building the next year, so I never had much more to do with him. I do know that he ended up losing his job due to some incident involving another female RA. Well, that was longer than I expected. Hopefully it's worth a laugh for anyone who actually read it, and at least I have it wrote down now. TLDR. While in college as an RA, I have a creep for a boss. He writes me up for not finding students who are irresponsible with their keys and get locked out of their rooms. My co-worker loses a building master key and is going to lose her job, housing, and be fined $12,000. We discovered that our boss had accidentally assigned his key to my friend and was in possession of the key assigned to her. Since he was irresponsible with assigning the keys, we are able to recover her key from him, and he got held accountable. That was a very clever and satisfying revenge. The creepy boss who wanted to screw OP up get fined himself. His small incident of negligence incurred his downfall. Here is a very interesting Reddit story for you. Deny my employee claim and tell me if I don't like it, I can leave? Ill withdraw. Everything from your company and watch you disintegrate. I have a story that started before the COVID pandemic and just concluded a while back. Obligatory first-time poster, and English is my third language, so forgive any errors I may make and my use of words. I'm a typical simple guy who just likes relaxing and was born with the proverbial silver spoon in my mouth. I am the black sheep of my family and a middle child to boot, double whammy. But I at least have a little brains and some luck, which I kind of use on a day-to-day basis. Due to my parents' connections, I managed to get into lucrative schools in my country, did my military service, and was promoted upward to captain, and later on was shipped off to college out of country. I have never been too close with many people, apart from my circle of friends, and I prefer it that way. After my college, I was employed in government. You guessed it, family connections, and after a few years was able to use my name to get ahead and meet people who helped me set up several businesses in my area, a coastal city where this story happens. The money I used was generally allowances, small inheritance from my late grandma, some investments, a fund that was started when I was a baby, and money gifted to me by family, basically an attempt not leave me broke enough to embarrass them, even though a simple low-maintenance fellow. Lol. My businesses are booming. Since the coastal area we live in attracts a lot of tourists, local and international, and of course some locals who wish to mingle with the tourists to get green cards, pen pals, spouses and such. Typical coastal city, I guess. The incident. As a proprietor of my businesses, I have most if not all of my staff on salary since it's the best way for them to gain benefits and is easier for me as a business owner. Tax-wise, tipping is more of a gift typically since we do not have a tipping culture. And I have my staff on comprehensive medical insurance, which has additional dental and optical on top of the National Governmental Healthcare Medical Scheme. Our government hospitals provide all services free, but wait times for elective surgeries are exhausting. We also have a mandatory legal requirement to provide employees with retirement benefit savings, minimum of 21 working days leave. I give 30, and my businesses offer paid overtime, unhindered medical leave for surgery and serious conditions, which can be extended as well as allowances to seek treatment such as chemo or dialysis. One of my female employees, an older lady who is brilliant and had moved up the ranks to manager and was adored by all, was booked for a hysterectomy since, as she told me, she was at risk of cervical cancer as her mother had passed from it a few years back, and since she already had 4 kids, it was the most logical step. She did her due diligence and found a private hospital which was in our system where she could have the procedure done. On the planned date, she applied for leave days, which we obviously rejected since this fell under the scope of medical leave. She went on to have the procedure successfully and had a quick recovery time. The bill was to be catered for by the company insurance, and we had made sure to get all the necessary pre-authorizations. A few months later, she came to work looking distraught, and in all honesty, we thought that she had been told that she had gotten cancer since she had asked for a day off to go for review and tests. But what happened was much worse. She had been given a bill by the hospital since the insurance had refused to pay for it, citing that it was not in the scope of cover. We were livid since we had made sure everything was in effing order. I sent my accounts manager to go have a talk with the insurance people as we tried to calm her down. The manager came back super angry and told me that basically, after showing them the evidence, the insurance people just told him to buzz off. I decided to personally go visit that office and get a clear understanding of what was happening. They kept me waiting for an hour, and even after that, had the audacity to inform me the director from the head office who was in the area had declined to meet me because he was quote-unquote busy. I was pissed to the high heavens, so I decided to go to their head office in the capital city, a 2-hour flight. The head office was no help and informed me that they had revised their policy and that it was not covered. I asked when the policy was revised. They informed me a month prior. I informed them the surgery was done 5 months prior and we had all the documentations. They claimed that it was 12 months retrospective. I inquired why I was not informed of it, since this was big news and I have held policies with them, and they told me that they had informed their large clients and would inform the other clients when their insurances were due for renewal. I demanded to speak to their boss, company vice president, since the CEO was not around, and they boldly told me he had no time for me, and frankly that, in verbatim, "We are a large company and have no time to argue semantics with low-end clients. If you don't like it, you can frankly leave and find a new insurance company." The revenge. If I had been initially pissed, I was full-blown mad. I was livid and filled with rage. In all my years, I may have experienced some disrespect, and I accepted it not to make problems, but this time it went too far. I decided in the heat of the moment to switch everything and be done with them. I flew back home and just plain went to the hospital and settled the bill in full, and took the receipt to my employee, who initially insisted that she would do anything to pay me back. But I refused, since it was no way her fault, and ill be damned if she pays for something that was way out of her control. I had a few days to cool down and talked with my directors. The words still etched on my mind. I asked how long it would take us to switch to another insurance. They went ahead and checked out a few large rivals of the insurance we had and discovered that if we switched, it would take 6 months for the new insurance to provide full coverage. The firm we picked, who I'll call New Insurance, offered us a way better deal to the one we had, and not only comprehensive cover, dental and optical, they also included mental health cover, physiotherapy and occupational therapy cover, rehabilitative services, mobility device acquisition, prosthetics and wheelchairs for some of the disabled employees, smart cards for direct payment on outpatient visits, kind of like a debit card, and a dedicated team of relationship managers, death and funeral benefits, and an expanded coverage area, plus up to 6 dependents plus spouse cover. It would cost me a little more, but I didn't really care. The people who dealt with us from our previous insurance, who I'll call old insurance, seemed unfazed that I was pulling my company from them, since they thought it was just a small business. They looked puzzled when I came in with several people and a few boxes of documents. What they failed to realize was that apart from that one business, which is a restaurant, I have 3 popular bars, a cab company, a hotel resort, cleaning service chain, a building and residential guard service, and several rental buildings in the town and around the country. Their shock was compounded when they were informed by the lawyer just who I am, and the shock, awe, confusion and panic when they heard my family name was an extremely satisfying sight. Cue the pleading and attempted negotiations and apologies. It was so big that the news reached their head office, who sent not only their director, the one who was apparently too big to see me, but also their chief legal officer, chief financial officer, and president of the company. I somehow also earned a personalized call from their CEO, who was abroad. No amount of sweet talking was changing my mind, and by the end of 6 weeks we had completely removed ourselves from the old insurance. It was now a waiting game to the beginning of the new insurance cover, and we really hoped that no one would become unwell by that time, but we were ready just in case. In that waiting time, and after the new insurance commenced, I talked to my friends and my family on one of my holiday visits. My older brother's kids adore me, and my family kind of realized they were a-holes to me and are trying to re-enter my life, and thought that was that. Aftermath. My friends and family took my words and also pulled their businesses from the insurance to other insurances. The company took such a huge hit, and when COVID came around and was a big deal, they were barely floating. They went into receivership soon after and were acquired by the insurance I had moved to, who happened to be their greatest rivals. The directors and CEO were given their golden parachutes and resigned, and most of their employees were luckily retained, apart from the senior executives, including the ones who told my manager to buzz off. In a cruel twist of irony, the building they were operating on in our town was sold, and if you guessed I purchased it, you would be absolutely correct. I decided to remodel the inside and turn it to a business rental space. All in all, it was a bit of a sweet payback. And wherever they are, I hope those disrespectful guys learned that everyone is human, and they are not above anyone. And remember that karma is a cold and heartless witch. Edit to add. My goodness, this post has blown up. I have gotten some awards and am grateful for it. Some of your comments have me silently chuckling to myself. Am happy I made your day, and hope you get bosses who understand, or you become an understanding boss yourself. In my post, I realized I said that my employee applied for leave, which we rejected since it fell under the scope of medical leave. What I meant was, I rejected her request for normal leave days since I wanted her to utilize the unhindered medical leave days since I did not know how long recovery would take, and I wanted her to keep earning her salary even as she rested. As for my English, I was sent to an English-speaking country for college, where my limited English was expanded, and it's my third language with me counting the 2 local languages I know. Thank you again, and have a great day, afternoon, morning, or night, depending on where you are from. The revenge was both astute and very satisfying. Insulted by the insurer, OP progressively withdrew all his businesses from the company's portfolio and switched to a better competitor. This resulted in a revenue blow to the insurer, which was further compounded by friends and family members following suit. During pandemic, the company finally closed down. Bye-bye. See you tomorrow.